Chapter 43. Fan Xian sat down, ignoring the boy and letting his sister sit first. He smiled and asked, "Who are you?" Of course he could guess who this chubby boy was, but he deliberately did not point it out. "I am Fan Xija, the young master of the Fan family." The chubby boy looked at him and snorted. "So you are the illegitimate son." Fan Xian heard a faint sound in his ear. Out of the corner of his eye, he looked at Lady Lu. Unexpectedly, Lady Lu had already run away for no reason. He didn't know where she had gone. It seemed that she had deliberately let her own son cause a ruckus and break Fan Xian's composure. In any case, if anything untoward happened, he could use the excuse that Xija was young and insensible. A strange smile appeared on Fan Xian's lips. He had known in Danzhou that this young master of the capital government had a bad temper and had always been rude and unreasonable. For the sake of his father, Fan Xian decided to take the time to teach this little brother a lesson in order to prevent the Fan family from offending the real nobles in the future because of this kid. But what happened next was completely out of his expectations. A cold voice rang out. It came from Fan Ruruo's thin lips. "Give me your hand." Having said that, Miss Fan took out a long ruler from under the table. "What?" Fan Xija mumbled. His face was full of fear, but he obediently extended his hand. With two smacks, two red marks appeared on Fan Xija's hand. Tears began to well up in his eyes, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. "Sister, for an outsider." Before he could finish the word outsider, Fan Ro expressionlessly struck the chubby boy's hand twice with the ruler. Fan Xian now realized that his sister's cold demeanor was very oppressive in the eyes of an ordinary person. "First, you cannot call my brother by his name. Secondly, you have to understand our family's identity. Don't say such nonsense. Third, you must be punished for being disrespectful to your brother." Fan Ruruo spoke lightly. The way she held the ruler reminded Fan Xian of those kindergarten aunties who looked weak and cute, but were actually very fierce. Fan Xija glared at Fan Xian, flattened his lips, and ran to the backyard. Every time he cries, he goes to find his mother. Fan Ruruo sighed. "I'm very curious. What is the meaning of Xija?" His thoughts are as sluggish as a pig's, and his tyrannical actions leave trails behind. Such an elegant name, yet it was interpreted by my younger sister into these two sentences. What a joke. It's not as funny as Big Brother's joke. Why can you beat people with a ruler? Father gave me the right to discipline him. This seems to be a little different from my analysis of this world. Are you talking about men's rights? Yes, there's also the issue of the distribution of power in the backyard of the family. At present, I seem to have gained a little power. But don't forget, your power is completely dependent on that man's likes and dislikes. Brother, don't forget that the man you're talking about is our father. Fan Xian and Fan Ro looked at each other and smiled. They were very happy. There were no outsiders present, and Fan Ro was no longer as restrained as before. She smiled, and it was obvious that she could not suppress the happiness in her heart. Fan Xian was the same. In this world, probably only his sister, who they often exchanged letters with, could truly use a certain logic that only he could use to converse with her. Furthermore, when they first exchanged letters, Fan Ro was still young. To a certain extent, Fan Xian's view of this world and life had been greatly influenced by Fan Xian's imperceptible influence. The two of them hadn't seen each other for 10 years, so they should have been somewhat unfamiliar. However, the conversation just now, which only the two of them could feel, quickly pulled the distance between them closer in their hearts. It was as if the brother or sister sitting in front of them had not been separated for 10 years. Instead, they were good friends who spent every day in the courtyard and studied side by side. In this kind of relationship, Fan Ruo saw Fan Xian as a teacher-like figure, while Fan Xian saw his sister as a student or junior. This kind of mentality was very subtle. Fan Xian looked at her with a slight smile and said in a low voice, "Seeing that you seem to be doing well in the manor, I've been worrying a bit too much." Fan Ro lowered her head and quietly said, "It's all thanks to you for your ideas." "Oh." Fan Xian smiled shyly. Could it be that the romantic scenes from his previous life that he had written had an effect? but this was not something he could ask directly. Recently, Lady Lu has been more peaceful, Fan Ro said lightly. She called her aunt Lady Lu. Even though there were only the two of them in the hall, it still seemed very cold. Fan Xian thought for a moment and then said, although I'm far away in Danzhou, I know that the Lu family has a very high status in the capital. Don't be too disrespectful to her. I won't. Fan Ro lowered her eyelids, her eyelashes resting on her white skin. It was very beautiful. Fan Xian looked at her with a smile. He realized that to find someone in a world who could understand oneself was indeed a very happy thing, even though this person had been taught by him. He softly said, "Did you receive my letter?" "Yes." Fan Ruoruo smiled. The frost on her face had long since disappeared. 2 nights ago, I saw that letter in my room. It scared me. I thought it was some bad guy, but when I saw the handwriting on the letter, I realized it was you. Fan Xian shrugged. Given Wu Zhu's abilities, being a messenger was a bit of a waste of his talent. No one entered the hall to interrupt their conversation, which Fan Xian was very satisfied with. He took a sip of tea and said seriously, "You probably don't know why I came to the capital this time." Fan Ro raised her head and looked at her brother with a faint smile. Fan Xian was a little embarrassed by her gaze. "What's wrong?" A teasing sigh sounded out. The girl smiled and said, "Many people probably know why you came to the capital, and I believe that the children of the famous families in the capital are all very curious. Count Sinan's illegitimate son has come to the capital this time, and how much confidence he has in that matter." Ah, Fan Xian was a little surprised. "I always thought that father's decision to let me come to the capital was a secret. Do many people know about it? But I believe that not many people in the capital know who I am. Why would anyone be curious about me? Because you came to the capital to get married." Fan Ruoruo smiled. "The woman father wants you to marry is very famous." Fan Xian frowned. Although he didn't necessarily want to marry her, he was still very concerned about what kind of person he might marry. "Do you know the young lady?" "My future sister-in-law is the young lady of the Lin family." Fan Ruoruo's eyes flashed with an unreadable light. "I'm not the only one who knows her. I believe that everyone in the capital knows her." "Which Lin family? Why is that woman so famous?" Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. "Brother, although you've always been far away in Danzhou, I know that Granny should have a copy of the paper printed in the palace." Fan Ruoruo laughed. Fan Xian thought for a moment, then slapped his forehead. Could it be that the Lin family is the family of Prime Minister Lin Ruofu? That young lady is the main character in the matter of the Prime Minister's illegitimate daughter? Chapter 44. Presently, the Qing kingdom was known as the Golden Age of Prosperity. The weather had been favorable for a decade, and the people were wealthy and at ease. They had the titles of the wisest ruler in 1,000 years, the best ruler in 1,000 years, and the best ruler in 1,000 years. But, miraculously, what followed was what was known as the most corrupt officialdom in 1,000 years and the most treacherous prime minister in 1,000 years. This treacherous minister was the prime minister, Lin Ruofu. Lin Ruofu was born poor and was not the son of a noble family. He had passed the imperial examinations and entered the officialdom, starting out as an appraiser in Suzhou. Soon after, he was transferred to the capital to serve as the registrar of the Zhanshi Fu, and then to the rank of the 12 guards of the Southern Office. He then entered the imperial censorate as the Zhangyin, and then became a scholar of the Hanlin Academy. In the last new policy, he was transferred to the 6 ministries to be in charge of specific affairs. He became an assistant minister of the Ministry of Appointments, and then a minister. He rose all the way to the head of the civil officials today, the prime minister, who was second only to the emperor and above tens of thousands. People looked closely at the official positions that the prime minister had held, only to discover that he had been a civil official, a military official, a minister of poetry, and a supervisor. Although his official position had risen and fallen, he had experienced all of the official circles of the kingdom of Qing, and his official position had always been slowly but surely rising. Rumor had it that Lin Ruofu had no one to rely on in the inner palace, nor did he have any complicated background or connections. Yet, he was able to rise and fall in the complicated officialdom of Qing Kingdom and never fall. This surprised many people. The prime minister appeared to be clear-minded on the surface, but he was sinister and ruthless on the inside, accepting countless bribes. In addition, he had offended many people in the struggle between the civil officials and the nobles, so he had an image of not being close to the nobles and not being loved by the people. However, with his decades of effort, he had long grown countless branches in the Qing Kingdom's civil official system. The big tree had always stood tall and did not fall. From time to time, there would be censors who would impeach the prime minister, but there was never any concrete evidence, so they could only drop the matter. The righteous people of Jingdo hated him to the bone and wanted nothing more than to eat his flesh raw. However, in front of the bureaucracy, no one dared to provoke him to his face. In the entire kingdom of Qing, only the emperor could demand the life and power of the prime minister. No one else could. This was the consensus of all the officials. In the entire kingdom of Qing, only the director of the Overwatch Council could spit in the face of the prime minister. No one else had the guts to do so. This was the unanimous opinion of all the nobles. And when the dean spat on the prime minister on the street, he still had to pay the price of 3 years' salary. This punishment was personally given by His Majesty. When people discovered that the emperor's trust in the prime minister had never wavered, those officials and scholars who boasted of their integrity began to despair. At this time, no one expected that the newspaper would publish the news that Prime Minister Lin Ruofu had an illegitimate daughter. It was normal for the patriarch to marry several concubines in any noble family. What if there is only one woman in the backyard? Sorry, I'm really embarrassed to go to the party. However, the customs of the world place great importance on bloodline and etiquette. Although the prime minister was known to be cunning and ruthless, he had always considered himself to be pure and upright. Unexpectedly, he had an illegitimate daughter outside. This was a loss of virtue. His daughter was already more than 10 years old, but he still hadn't brought her back to the residence, allowing her to live alone outside. As a father, this was proof that he didn't have a benevolent heart. Because the news had come from the imperial palace, it caused a small earthquake in the bureaucracy of the capital. People speculated that His Majesty was tired of the prime minister and wanted to replace him. That was why the imperial censorate had collectively submitted a petition. Contrary to everyone's expectations, His Majesty personally appeared and suppressed the matter. The matter gradually calmed down, but the prime minister's illegitimate daughter became the center of attention. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. He had never imagined that the woman he was about to marry would have such a background, and one so similar to his own. At this time, there was a commotion outside. The siblings knew that the man had returned to the manor. They looked at each other and said nothing more. Fan Xian only used his eyes to ask his sister to take him out for a stroll when she had time. Ruro nodded slightly. Candles were lit, but the sky outside was not completely dark, so the candlelight seemed very dim. There was a table of sumptuous dishes in the hall, and 5 people sat there. Many servant girls and servants were waiting on them. Fan Xian noticed that Lady Lu was not like the concubines of other families, who first served the patriarch as he ate. Instead, she sat next to the middle-aged man with a calm demeanor. That middle-aged man was his father? Thinking of this, Fan Xian's eyebrows involuntarily furrowed into beautiful little wrinkles. Count Sinan's face was solemn, and his facial features were regular. He wore a 4-inch beard that people of the time liked to wear. One could tell that he had a serious temperament, and that he was serious in speech and manner. They quietly finished their meal. Count Sinan walked in front, and Fan Xian followed behind him all the way to the study. This was the first time Fan Xian had been alone with his father. He smiled, but was not very excited. In the depths of his heart, he had never truly regarded Count Sinan as his own flesh and blood. Count Sinan looked at the young man in front of him. He looked at the young man's delicate features and seemed to be lost in thought. After a while, he gently sighed. "You really look like your mother." Fan Xian did not respond, because he had never seen what his mother looked like. But when it came to his father, he had countless questions in his heart. He knew that it was not his place to ask. How'd you been in Danjo these past few years? Count Sinan looked at him. There seemed to be some weariness in his eyes, but it still could not hide the traces of his youthful handsomeness. Not bad. On the way here, I believe that with your personality, you should have found out from Tong Zijing why I wanted you to come to the capital so urgently. Yes. Do you feel wronged? No, Fan Xian replied with a smile. I just hitched a ride to the capital. I didn't say that I had to marry Miss Lin. As soon as these words left his mouth, the study fell into a deathly silence. After a while, Count Sinan said coldly, Do you know what it means to marry her? It means that, in addition to the emperor's unfailing favor, Fan Xian will also be able to cling to an incredibly thick thigh in the court. Fan Xian replied sarcastically. Originally, he had no feelings for the middle-aged man in front of him. Logically speaking, he should have been able to keep his cool as a bystander. But when he thought of the fact that Count Sinan was his father, and that he had treated his children's marriage as a political marriage, although he understood and accepted it, it did not mean that he was not angry. But this anger had been well hidden over the past few days. Chapter 45. Good. You're angry at last. The corners of Count Sinan's lips curled up into a smile. I've been listening to the news from Danjo, and I thought you weren't one to get angry. Child, you're only 16. If you hide all your emotions in your heart, it will be very painful. So what? Fan Xian looked at his father with a strange expression. He was certain of something. There's something I must tell you, father. What is it? I am not a person who is easy to control. Fan Xian's words were very straightforward. I have no intention of controlling you, even though you are my son. Count Sinan looked coldly into Fan Xian's eyes, as if he wanted to see a hint of panic in Fan Xian's calm eyes. But the marriage with the Prime Minister's family must be carried out. There is no room for discussion. Fan Xian lowered his head and thought for a moment. Then he looked up and smiled. You could try. But his smile was full of confidence and determination. Count Sinan seemed a little angry. He put his palms on the armrests of his chair, his veins bulging. After a while, he suppressed his anger and laughed coldly. Child, why can't you understand? That Miss Lin is gentle, considerate, educated, and reasonable. She's a good match. Besides, given the status of the Fan family, do we need to rely on marriage to secure our position? Is Emir Lin Ruofu really worth our attention? Fan Xian was a little surprised. He felt that his father was not pretending. But if even the Prime Minister did not need to care, then why did he want to marry Miss Lin? Was it really just because Miss Lin was so outstanding? No matter what, Fan Xian would not believe this kind of reasoning. Why must we marry her? Fan Xian asked, frowning. Count Sinan smiled. Because Miss Lin's mother is the eldest princess, His Majesty's sister. The eldest princess has never married, but she secretly manages the business of the royal family, providing the entire kingdom of Qing and the palace with an endless supply of money. Fan Xian was extremely shocked, thinking that his future wife was actually the eldest princess daughter. Didn't that mean the Prime Minister and the eldest princess had an affair? Or even multiple affairs? No wonder the Prime Minister had been able to climb up so smoothly all these years. It turned out that he was walking the path of a gigolo. Not many people in the world knew about this secret. If his father had not grown up with His Majesty the Emperor, he would not have found out. Fan Xian suddenly realized that his father should not have told him such a deep secret. Count Sinan smiled. You should also know that these words cannot be said outside. Whoever says them will die. So when these words reach your ears, just pretend you didn't hear them. The reason why I'm telling you this secret of the imperial family is so that you can be prepared in case there's anything inappropriate when you interact with Miss Lin in the future. Fan Xian suddenly thought of what Wu Zhu had told him before, and his expression darkened. He sighed. The royal business that the eldest princess manages, was it originally the business of the Yi family? Not bad. Count Sinan's eyes were filled with affection. He looked at the young man in front of him with admiration. He was surprised that the young man had seen through the truth of the matter so quickly. Her Royal Highness, the eldest princess, only has this one daughter, and His Majesty has long decided to let the eldest princess manage the royal business. So whoever marries Miss Lin and becomes the son-in-law of Her Royal Highness, the eldest princess, may become the future owner of the royal business. Having said so much, Count Sinan felt a little tired, but deep down he was also excited. He stood up and stared at Fan Xian. That business belonged to your mother, so you're simply taking back what belongs to you. Count Sinan said slowly, one word at a time. There was a deathly silence. Father, you have great foresight. I am impressed. Fan Xian bowed to his father. Although she is not a princess, she is still a member of the imperial family. Do you think that by doing this, we can take back my mother's business? I think that is a little too arrogant. Of course, there's a backup plan. Don't forget, I am an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. I am in charge of money. Fan Jian smiled, growing more and more appreciative of the calm mind and attitude of the young man in front of him. Also, there is something I need to tell you. Although Lin Ruofu, that old thief, does not have much of a say in this matter, he still has some doubts about the marriage between our two families. So, I hope that you can perform well in the capital in the near future. Why? Fan Xian was puzzled. Although Lin Ruofu was the prime minister and the head of the civil officials, Fan Xian was well aware of the Fan family's position in the deep lake of the capital. If Lin Ruofu could make such a strong ally, he should be happy. Why would he oppose it? If one considered their status, the young lady seemed to be the same as Fan Xian. Everyone has their own position. Different factions have different things to consider, Fan Jian explained calmly. The Fan family is a large family in the capital, and Lin Ruofu is the head of the civil officials. A secret marriage between the two families is a matter of great importance. Lin Ruofu is hesitant because he is afraid that His Majesty will suspect his intentions, and he is afraid that the young people in the civil system will have second thoughts because of this. Fan Xian sighed and laughed at himself. I thought a lot about it on the way here. It turns out that this is just a hot-headedness, a one-sided idea of the Fan family. Yes, so you have to think of a way to get the young lady of the Lin family to approve of you. Fan Jian smiled, but he did not understand. A hot-headedness. What does that mean? Wrong. Fan Xian pursed his lips into a smile and did not explain further. He changed the subject. Father, there is something I have always been curious about. I don't know if I can ask. Ask away. Forget it. It's getting late. I'll go rest. For some reason, Fan Xian stopped talking and changed the subject. I am not familiar with the capital. Can I have Teng Zijing follow me? Teng Zijing is good at bribing people along the way, but he is only a 4th-level master. Fan Jian frowned. I will arrange a stronger guard for you. The water in the capital is deep. Fan Xian smiled. There is no need. It was not easy to get familiar with him. There is no need to change him. The father and son chatted for a while longer. Seeing that it was late at night, Fan Xian bowed and excused himself. A servant girl was already waiting outside. She passed through a complicated corridor and led him to his bedroom. Chapter 46. Lying on the fragrant bed, his fingers unconsciously stroking the smooth silk surface. Fan Xian was still digesting what his father had said. Although he knew that he would run into some trouble in the capital, he had not expected it to be so troublesome. Before he left just now, he had planned to ask his father about the matter of the Liu family sending people to poison him 4 years ago. But on second thought, perhaps many of the dirty things in the noble families were hidden under that kind of powder. Even if he wanted to forcefully tear it open, it would be of no use. After all, in their conversation earlier, he could feel that his father, whom he had just met, still had some true feelings for him. It seemed that he had been sent to Danzhou because the person who had killed his mother was still in the capital. Thinking of this, a bitter smile appeared on his lips. Was he really going to marry that sickly woman? Now it seemed that he had been scheming against the Lin girl. She really was a pitiful little girl. He decided to find an opportunity to see the Lin girl. Having made this decision, his gaze once again fell on the narrow box that had been placed carelessly in the corner. He was curious as to where the key could be. Jinqi slowly flowed through his body. Because of the journey, he had stopped practicing for dozens of days. Now, he quietly resumed his training. Before entering meditation, Fan Xian thought of his father, whom he had just met, and countless questions welled up in his mind. When Fan Xian first tossed and turned in the fan manor in the capital, Count Sinan was also in a daze in his study. This was the first time in 16 years that he had seen Fan Xian. Seeing that clean and beautiful face, Count Sinan sank into some sort of memory, unable to extricate himself for a long time. He muttered, "Little Yi, your child has grown up. He's just like you back then. Young, but he seems to know everything." Chun Pingping was still against him coming to the capital, so I took advantage of his vacation to call Xian back to the capital. Someone promised that the Yi family business would return to him. The light shone on the middle-aged man's solemn face. "Don't worry," he said softly. "Within the kingdom of Qing, no one would dare harm him." Sunlight shone through the shadows of the clouds, sometimes bright and sometimes dark. The old trees on either side of the road sprouted new branches, gently swaying in the wind. It was already late spring. In a lake at the foot of the mountain, the tender lotus flowers were beginning to bloom. The carriage of Fan Manor moved slowly along the road, with guards in front and behind it. It looked quite imposing. It was very quiet in the carriage. Fan Xian's eyes were half closed. Ruo was carefully peeling off the skin of a loquat, and then she brought the sweet and sour flesh to her brother's lips. Fan Xian opened his mouth and swallowed. It was so sour that he hurriedly swallowed a few mouthfuls of saliva. Fan Xia's face was full of disbelief and fear as he watched this scene unfold before him. His 15-year-old sister was skilled in chess, the zither, calligraphy, and painting. She was famous among the upper echelons of society in the capital. She had always been arrogant, like an iceberg that wouldn't melt. Countless scholars and nobles sighed in sorrow. Unexpectedly, she would serve Fan Xian with such care, personally peeling loquats for him to eat. Fan Ruo had no idea that her worshipful expression as she looked at her older brother had fallen into her younger brother's eyes. Subconsciously, she just wanted to make her brother feel better. She thought that her brother must have suffered a lot over the past 10 years in Danzhou. Now that he had finally entered the capital, he was about to marry Miss Lin. In her eyes, there was no woman in the world who could truly match up to her brother. Moreover, Miss Lin was in such a state. Although Miss Fan's talent had long spread far and wide in the capital, in her heart, she was still the little girl who listened to ghost stories in the Danzhou estate. Only Fan Ruo knew that her brother had thousands of poems and books in his chest. As for the excuses he made in the letter about Grandmaster Chao and Su Wong, Fan Ruo thought of this and smiled slightly. Looking at her brother in front of her, she thought to herself, "You are obviously talented, but why don't you let me tell others?" Fan Xian also enjoyed the warmth of siblings. He half closed his eyes. He knew that his sister had long guessed that he was the one who wrote the story of the stone, but he was thinking about something else. Fan Xian's situation in the capital was different from what he had expected before he entered the capital. At least Lady Lu seemed to have learned her lesson from the incident 4 years ago, so she was now well-behaved. And her rumored arrogant brother seemed to be very obedient to Ruo's discipline. There was nothing particularly unbearable to Fan Xian. His family was quite happy. Fan Xian looked at Fan Xian's face curiously. He had to admit that his half-brother was much better looking than he was, but he still strongly believed that he was the true young master of the Fan family. This person in front of him was just an outsider. But when he thought of his sister, who had always been as calm as a chrysanthemum flower, and who he had always admired so much, Fan Xian was a little puzzled. He thought to himself, could it be that this Fan Xian really is something special? No one on this street dares to provoke me. The proud Fan Xian looked at the man in front of him, who was 4 years older than him, and said arrogantly, "You've just arrived in the capital. I'll take you around for a couple of days." Fan Xian leaned lazily on the soft cushions, and when he heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. He had originally wanted his sister to take him around the capital to see the sights, but he hadn't expected that Fan Xian, his brother, would show up uninvited and insist on staying in the carriage. "Hey, little guy, why do you have to follow us?" he asked Fan Xian. Fantasia shouted. "Don't call me little guy. I'm the true young master of the Fan family." Fancian was surprised. "Don't you think you're making yourself look bad by shouting like that? Even if you're afraid of me fighting over your property, you should at least play dirty." He patted his brother's head and continued with a smile. "You should learn more from your mother." Fantasia looked at the bashful smile on her pretty face, and for some reason, he felt afraid. He shrank back and hid behind Fan Roro, thinking that this guy was too strange. How could he speak so brazenly? As they spoke, the carriage came to a busy part of the capital. It was noon, and there were many people on the street. Restaurants on both sides of the road opened their doors to welcome guests. The sound of yelling and the aroma of food wafted in through the curtains, enticing Fantasia to clamor for a meal. Tung Zijing entered the restaurant to make a reservation. Fantasia and Ruo, under the protection of a few guards, went to a street stall to buy noodles. Fancian, however, was half squatting in the restaurant, looking at the decorations on the pillars in the corridor in amazement. The decorations were beautifully drawn and painted with gold. They were unusually dazzling, completely different from what he had seen in the books of his previous life. Two guards were some distance away from him, secretly looking around. At that moment, a middle-aged woman in ordinary clothes approached like a thief, holding a baby. She lowered her voice and asked, "Do you want a book?" "They're all not approved by the 8th Bureau." The scene was familiar to Fancian. It was warm, touching, and made him feel at home. He raised his head and asked tenderly, "Is it Japanese or Western?" Chapter 47. The full name of the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council was the head office of the Literary Academy of the Imperial Court. It was similar to the Press Censorship Bureau of the Republic of China. It was responsible for reviewing all official texts. Only articles that passed the 8th Bureau's review were allowed to be published. A few years ago, the head office of the Literary Academy was mostly taken over by the Ministry of Education, but it still had the right to review books privately printed by the people. Therefore, articles that involved depictions of human body art, violent aesthetics, or suggestions for reform without the emperor's permission could not pass the 8th Bureau's review. But no matter the world, people always had a jaw-dropping passion for pornography and politics. So naturally, there were some underground booksellers. Generally, no bookseller dared to touch political books, but romantic novels such as The Pleasure Spell were printed in large quantities and sent to different cities through different channels to reach the hands of the citizens who needed them. The woman carrying the child was undoubtedly the last link in this distribution channel. Everyone in the capital was used to this kind of scene, and no one made a fuss. Even the government turned a blind eye to it, let alone the people who benefited greatly from it. "What did you say, master?" The woman selling banned books obviously did not know about the wonderful existence of AV. Her eyes were wide open in a daze. Fancian smiled and asked, "What books do you have?" The middle-aged woman transferred the child to her other hand and took out a large book about 8 inches long. The pages were all red, and it looked really good. Fancian was a little impressed. Holding a child and putting such a large book in her clothes did not break the corner. "The most popular novel in the capital recently," the middle-aged woman said mysteriously. Fancian took the book. Of course, he would not take the woman's pretense of mystery seriously. He smiled and turned the page, and his expression suddenly became very interesting. There was no name on the cover of the book, but on the title page, there were 4 big words. "I can't think of it." Flipping another page, he saw the following words. Who knew that this wife was born with a strange hobby? Once a man gets close to her, he feels his muscles and bones soften, making him feel like he's lying on cotton. Fancian's mouth opened wide, and he was speechless for a long time. He could tell at a glance what book it was. This was, of course, The Dream of the Red Chamber that he had copied for his sister. The passage on the title page was from the 21st chapter. It was about Xiaoping Er's soft words to save Jiaoyan. It was about the story of Miss Duo. The middle-aged woman thought that this beautiful young man was moved. She laughed softly and said, "This is only one part of the story. The best part is yet to come." It was said that in his previous life, Fan Xian was always bedridden, and his body was inconvenient. Naturally, it was not convenient for him to trouble his nurse to flip through the book for him, so he could only read the chapter of Dream of the Red Chamber over and over again, reading it countless times. It was all because of Miss Duo's scholarly beauty that his brain was tired countless times. Today, in the middle of the bustling streets of the capital, Fan Xian suddenly saw this familiar passage. How could he not be shocked? He was deeply moved, but he did not understand. Only he and his sister knew about Dream of the Red Chamber. How could it have been printed into a book and sold on the streets? Fan Xian did not even bargain. He took out some silver and paid the bill. He did not feel the slightest pain. The silver had been earned from selling newspapers in Danzhou, and he had spent it extravagantly. After the middle-aged woman walked away with a face full of smiles, Fan Rou led Fan Xizha to the front of the restaurant. Fan Xizha didn't have any dough figurines in his hands, but he did have a candy figurine that he was licking. "What were you doing just now?" Fan Rou asked her brother with a smile. Without waiting for Fan Xian to answer, Fan Xizha sneered. "I saw it. He bought a book from that woman. He didn't even know how to avoid it. Instead, he bought such unsightly things on the street." Fan Rou was startled. She didn't know what was going on. At that moment, Fan Xian wanted to find a place to ask his sister, so he didn't bother talking to the boy. Just then, Tang Zijing came out to report that the private room had been vacated. Fan Xian took Ruoruo's cold hand and walked upstairs. Fan Xizha was startled. He licked the candy figurine and quickly followed. There were many people in the restaurant, but the third floor was very quiet. The private rooms were all booked. It seemed that Tang Zijing's ability to get a private room was not bad. Fan Xian felt that asking his father for him to come was indeed the right decision. Sitting at the table, Fan Xian glanced at Fan Xizha, whose eyes were rolling. He smiled and didn't avoid him. He handed the red-page book to his sister. Fan Rou frowned slightly and took it. As soon as she opened the title page, her eyes filled with shock. After flipping through it a few more times, she was even more shocked. She quickly turned her head and explained nervously, "Brother, this is the first time I've seen it too." Fan Xian smiled and comforted her. "I'm not blaming you." He had guessed long ago that his sister would have bound her copy of Dream of the Red Chamber into a book, and that she wouldn't be able to resist sharing it with her close friends. But he thought that Ruoruo's friends were probably the daughters of the royal family. Even if there was some circulation, there was no reason for it to spread to the outside world. It wasn't until today, when he saw this book on the street, that he realized that he had gone to another world, and that it had underestimated the power of the pirates. Fan Rou thought for a bit and remembered something. Last year, she had bound the first 68 chapters of Dream of the Red Chamber together and placed it under a hardwood in her room. One day, Imperial Prince Jing's daughter, Royal Princess Rojia, came to the estate to chat and happened to see this book. After she picked it up, she refused to let it go and said that she wanted to take it back to the estate. But in Fan Rou's heart, this was her brother's work. How could she dare to leave it outside the estate? Well, she lost it. So no matter how much Royal Princess Rojia begged and even got angry, she didn't agree. In the end, it was Princess Consort Jing who thought of a way to have a female official come over and copy it for a few days. Now that things had come to this, Fan Rou couldn't stop her, so she let her be. Who knew that this book would spread from 1 to 10, 10 to 100, and eventually became a secret that everyone knew. It was secretly circulated among the manors of the princes and dukes. Then it spread to the market. No one knows that I wrote it, right? Fan Xian took the book and flipped through it. When he found that the author's name was Chao Shuaqin, he felt slightly comforted. Fan Rou blamed herself. "Brother, fame and fortune are like floating clouds. I accidentally spread this book, which is already a big mistake. How could I dare to reveal that this book was written by you?" Fame and fortune are like floating clouds? Fan Xian smiled awkwardly and rubbed his little sister's head. However, he discovered that he had accidentally messed up the little girl's hair. He hurriedly apologized and explained, "Since I wrote it, naturally, I was prepared to let the world see it." When he thought of the money he had spent earlier, he felt a bit of heartache and sighed. I just didn't expect that the pirated merchant would get the first drop of the soup. It's such a waste of money." The siblings talked for a while more, and the waiter began to serve the dishes, so they didn't mention it. At this time, the two of them noticed that Fantasia had suddenly broken free from the silence. He looked at Fantasia with a bit of shock in his eyes. His speech was a bit unclear as he enviously said, "That book was written by you?" Chapter 48. Hearing this, Fanro remembered that her conversation with her brother had fallen into his ears. She didn't know if he would bring trouble to her brother if he told Lady Lu. Fanruo's cold expression changed to one of faint worry. She looked at Fantasia. Fantasia's gaze had changed from shock to admiration. "What's wrong?" Fantasia looked at him with a strange smile. Fantasia finally couldn't stand the seemingly infinite tenderness in his gaze, which was actually infinitely cold. He trembled and said, "I'm just surprised that you wrote this book." Fantasia was a little puzzled. "You've read this book?" In his impression, in his previous life, if people read Dream of the Red Chamber at the age of 12 and loved reading it, then when they grew up, they would become hipsters or hooligans who deceived female hipsters. "No." Fantasia quickly shook his head. "I've read some. It's boring." Having said this, he seemed to feel that he had regained some of his dignity. He raised his head a little higher. "It's just that Master read it and said." He thought for a moment, then decided to speak the truth. Master was very impressed. He said that the author's writing style was strange and that he had a strong heart. These were two very high comments, but Fantasia didn't blush. He smiled. "So you admire me?" "I admire Master." Fantasia thought for a moment. "And Master really likes your book." Suddenly, his eyes shone with greed. "And even though I don't read it, I know that on the market, this manuscript is sold in separate volumes. Each volume can be sold for 8 taels of silver." He nodded and looked at Fantasia as if he were looking at an idol. "You can make so much money just by writing a few words." "That's amazing. I think I understand why my sister admires you so much." "I didn't make that money." Fantasia casually corrected him, but he felt strange. Fantasia's opinion of him had improved, not because of his poetry, but because of the money he could make from writing. Thinking about it, he understood. His father, Count Sinan, was the Emperor of Qing's personal financial steward. It was no wonder that Fantasia was born with a passion for money. Fantasia rubbed his hands and said enthusiastically, "But only you can write. If you're willing to earn this money in the future, I can invest in it." Fantasia sighed. He realized that his younger brother was actually quite naive. It was a pity that he and Fantasia had a conflict of interest. Although Fantasia didn't necessarily have any ideas about the Fan family business, Lady Lu's ideas were already deeply rooted. Suddenly, he had a thought and decided to try something. After all, they were brothers connected by blood. It was best to avoid some miserable endings if possible. "You still haven't told me why you're following me. Don't you have to go to school today?" Fantasia had already made up his mind, so he was interested in chatting with his half-brother. Although Fantasia was young, he wasn't an idiot. He knew that what he had just revealed had made the other party happy, so he put on a cute smile and answered with a trembling voice. "Because Mom said Big Brother is capable, so she asked me to play with Big Brother more. It's always good to be influenced." Fantasia sighed in his heart. He thought to himself that no one in the world was better at pretending to be cute than him. To think that Fantasia would actually play it in front of him. It could be said that Fantasia pretended to be shy and Confucius Analects of Confucius. He knew that Fantasia was following him because of Lady Lu's idea, but there was no need for Fantasia to be friendly. Even if Fantasia realized that his father didn't just view him as a tool, there was no reason for him to be so reckless. The food arrived. Fantasia moved his chopsticks like the wind, sweeping them across the plates. The tips of his chopsticks accurately picked up some food from each plate and put it into his mouth. He didn't care about the dumbfounded expressions on the faces of his siblings. After licking his lips and savoring the food for a while, Fantasia nodded. "The food in the capital is really good." Fanro was very delicate. She casually ate some food, then stopped. She turned her body sideways to read Dream of the Red Chamber. At the table, only Fancien and Fantasia were eating heartily. The more Fantasia ate, the more depressed he became. He was much fatter than Fancien, so why couldn't he eat as much or as fast as Fancien? The more Fan Ruo read, the more her brows furrowed. She realized that the bookseller's version of Dream of the Red Chamber wasn't much different from the one she had in her room. It was just that the first page of the title page had purposely extracted Lady Duo's words. She was afraid that the people who read the book in the capital would think that Dream of the Red Chamber was an obscene book. Fancien saw her expression and knew what she was angry about. He smiled and put his chopsticks on the side of the fish plate. This is just a marketing ploy. What's there to be angry about? The siblings' voices gradually grew louder. Fanro vaguely guessed what marketing ploy meant, but Fantasia was confused. Take a book, for example. Before people buy it, they will definitely flip through it to see what it's about. So the preface, postscript, and the like must be clear. It doesn't necessarily need to be clear about the entire book, but must be interesting. Fancien took a sip of tea and continued. Sister, you're angry because this unscrupulous bookseller put Lady Duo's part at the very front. This part clearly doesn't explain the overall style of the story, but it can easily cause the common people to misunderstand and think that this story is about romance. Am I right? Fanro opened her eyes wide and nodded. She thought to herself that such fragrant words were being sold as such filthy material. Shouldn't she be angry? But the bookseller must do this. Fancien looked at his sister's serious expression and couldn't help but laugh. If I were to do it, I would go even further than they did. This book has 10 chapters, so it should be printed on the title page of the book. Below each chapter, there should be a few lines of the most tempting words. That way, it can make the reader's heart itch. They can only buy the book and read it carefully at home. Like what? Like something like Lady Duo? Then what should I write this time? Fanruo had already understood her brother's meaning. She smiled and pointed to a part of the book. It was chapter 23, Romance of the Western Chamber. The beautiful song of the peony pavilion alarmed the maiden's heart. This time, it was about what happened before the burial of the flower. There was no way to find a phrase that would make one blush. Fancien chuckled. Since there's the word beautiful song, of course it's easy to write. If it were me, I would use the part inside. Most of the people in the garden are girls. They are in a chaotic world, innocent and unaffected. They sit or lie down without hiding, laughing without the heart. How could they know what Baoyu was thinking right now? That Baoyu's heart was not at ease, so he was too lazy to stay in the garden. He only fooled around outside, but in a daze, he saw the falling red spell. Then he painted the words sit or lie down without hiding, laughing without the heart, fooling around, and falling red. Fanro lowered her head to think, and found that it was as he had said. It was just some casual words, but with this combination and the addition of the word beautiful song, it couldn't help but give people some space to think. Her face reddened slightly, and she said in a low voice, so you often do these kinds of improper things. Fantasia, who was listening to the side, was stunned. He gave a thumbs up and said, Big brother, you really are talented. With a puff, Fancien spat out all the tea in his mouth. At that moment, an extremely arrogant voice came from outside. Where did this arrogant person come from? His heart is filled with perversion, and he dares to call himself talented? Chapter 49. The restaurant that the Fan siblings had chosen was called Escher Tavern. It was one of the wealthiest places in the capital, so every noon, there were always rich officials, scholars, and beautiful women who came here to drink and chat. But no one knew where these scholars earned their money, and why these beautiful women were willing to show their faces in public. In any case, the third floor was quiet, and if one did not have the appropriate status, they would not be able to go up. Because everyone knew that those who could sit at the table on the third floor of Escher Tavern were people of high status. There were very few conflicts. After all, the capital was not small, but there were many hidden connections in the officialdom. Who knew who was behind them? The one who had just spoken out to refute Fancien's theory of peddling things on the street was a true scholar. His name was He Zhongwei, and he had always been famous for his talent. He was highly appreciated by the scholars in the capital, so he was a bit arrogant. A few days ago, Hizongwei was reading Dream of the Red Chamber at a friend's place. Although he was very dissatisfied with the meaning of the book and didn't think there was anything special about the poems, he still admired the author's meticulous effort in writing hundreds of thousands of words. Today, he had come to the restaurant and drunk 2 or 3 cups of yellow wine. He was slightly tipsy, but he heard a few ignorant youths in the room next door talking nonsense about Dream of the Red Chamber. His heart was filled with anger, and he shouted these words. At that moment, the 3 Fan siblings had finished eating and were chatting over tea. Hearing this, Fan Xizha thought of his earlier boasting. He thought of how they had criticized Fan Xian and how he had lost face. He couldn't help but be angry. He was born into the Fan clan and was extremely noble. He had always run amok on the streets, so he didn't want to be insulted by these pedantic scholars. He lifted the curtain and jumped into the hall on the 3rd floor. Fan Xian thought that since he had just entered the capital, it would be better to keep a low profile. He looked at his sister and asked for her opinion. Fan Ruo knew what he was thinking. She smiled and shook her head, indicating that Fan Xizha wouldn't go too far. Over the past 2 years, Fan Xizha had gradually grown older. Under Fan Ruo's advice, he had become more sensible. Smashing and robbing on the streets had basically disappeared, which was why Fan Xizha was so relaxed. Fan Xizha rushed into the hall and accurately picked out Hizongwei from the crowd. He walked over to the scholar and snorted. "Were you the one who said that? What if I was?" Hizongwei's skin was dark, and his face was prominent. It looked a bit ugly. When he saw someone rushing out from the inner room, he knew that his words had offended someone. However, when he saw the arrogant appearance of the rich and powerful son, his blood rushed to his head. He said coldly, "You're so young, yet you speak so rudely. I wonder which family taught you." Although this gifted scholar, he had a wide circle of friends in the capital, he had never met the 12-year-old Fan Xizha, so he was very courageous. Fan Xizha was just going to scold him a little, but when he heard the word upbringing, he remembered how his mother usually scolded him. He shouted angrily, "You bastard, whose family are you?" Hizongwei had long forgotten his sister's teachings. He jumped up and slapped the man's face. Hizongwei had never expected that someone would dare to be so tyrannical in a place as elegant as Stone Tavern. He hurriedly took half a step back and dodged the slap. The green scarf on his head was torn, and he looked a bit wretched. The people who sat at the same table as Hizongwei were all rather renowned scholars, and there was even a noble character among them. When he saw this situation, he couldn't help but be furious and said, "You dare to be so impudent in broad daylight? Do you still have any respect for the law?" "Law?" Fan Xizha snorted. "I am the law." Having said this, he clenched his fists and continued to punch Hizongwei. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the side and grabbed Fan Xizha's thin wrist. Fan Xizha felt as if his wrist was being held by a red-hot iron band. The pain seeped into his bones. He couldn't help but cry out. "Why aren't you helping me?" He scolded. His bodyguard moved forward to help, but unexpectedly, his figure swayed. 2 palms landed on his chest and abdomen, and he retreated. The one who had grabbed Fan Xizha's wrist was the bodyguard of the gloomy man at the table. This bodyguard looked ordinary, but his eyes shone brightly. He was clearly an expert. "Throw this child away. Don't let him disturb Zongwei's mood," ordered the gloomy man. The expert waved his arm, and Fan Xizha was thrown away like a little chick. Fan Xian had thought that Fan Xizha would at most argue a little. How could he have known that, in the blink of an eye, the situation had become so serious? But he remembered that his younger brother was young and arrogant. Although Ro said that he had restrained himself, he still couldn't shake off his little debauchee aura, so he thought it would be fine to let him suffer a little. But he had never expected that there would be a master among them, and that this master would be so ruthless. There was a hidden force hidden in that throw. If it wasn't careful, he would end up with broken bones and vomiting blood. No matter how unbearable Fan Xizha was, it was a bit too much to use such a method on a 12-year-old child. Somehow, Fan Xian was already outside the door. With a flick of his wrist, he had already grabbed Fantasia by the collar. Then he used the momentum to turn his body. His right hand twisted clockwise, and Fantasia began to spin in a circle. 1 circle, 2 circles, 3 circles. Fantasia's body stopped spinning. His eyes were wide open, and it seemed that he still didn't know what had happened. Fantasia let go of his hand, and with a bitter smile, handed the still dizzy Seizha to Ruo. He stepped forward, looked at the expert, and said softly, "My younger brother is young," and offended him. "But for you to be so heavy-handed, you have gone too far." The people at the table with the scholar snorted. They didn't know what to say. After all, what the scholar said was true. Only the gloomy young man drank his wine with some self-restraint. He didn't even look at Fantasia. After straightening his headscarf, Hizonwei felt that he was in a sorry state. Looking at the beautiful face of the young man in front of him, he felt an inexplicable anger. It seemed that even his smile was repulsive. He said hatefully, "Such a naughty and mischievous child. Why not punish him a little?" Fantasia ignored him. He smiled warmly at the expert, and then took 2 steps forward. The expert, who had seen Fantasia twist his wrist and draw a circle to dissipate the force, couldn't help but feel that he was a bit unfathomable. He frowned slightly, and, as if to show weakness, he followed Fantasia's steps and took 2 steps back. The 2 of them took 2 steps back, and the figure of Fanro, who was wearing a full veil, was revealed. Fanro was famous in the capital, and the people in the restaurant had long heard of her name. A few of them had even seen her from afar at the prince's poetry competition. Among them were some of the children of high-ranking officials. They were all surprised and greeted her from distance. It was only now that the people at the table facing Fantasia knew who the troublemaker was. They couldn't help but feel a bit anxious. When Hizonwei saw Fanruo, his expression changed slightly, as if he wanted to say something. Chapter 50. Tung Zijing hurried up from downstairs. Seeing the scene, he frowned and whispered something into Fantasia's ear. Only then did Fantasia realize that the man was Guo Baoquan, the only son of the Minister of Rights, Guo Yu. He was now a palace editor and had a bit of a reputation. When the gloomy-faced young man saw Fan Ruo, his eyes revealed an expression that Fantasia loathed. "I was wondering which family could be so tyrannical. So it's the son of Count Sinan." Count Sinan had always been favored by the emperor, but his official position was only that of an assistant minister of the 4th rank. Moreover, the children of ordinary officials had no idea of the hidden power of the Fan family. Fantasia didn't want to make a big deal out of this. After all, it was Fantasia who had made the first move. And no matter what, the one who spoke first seemed to be a fan of Dream of the Red Chamber. But hearing such teasing words, he couldn't help but frown. Guo Baoquan's father was a high-ranking official, and he himself was a palace editor on good terms with the crown prince. As a result, he had developed an arrogant and condescending temperament. When he saw the rumored icy Fan Ruo, he became angry and laughed coldly. How laughable! A mere member of the Fan family dares to use his power to oppress others. How disgraceful! He had always called himself a scholar. With a swish, he opened his folding fan with a certain elegance. The scholars next to him were worried. They had offended Count Sinan and didn't know how to deal with it. Hearing Guo Baoquan's words, they hurriedly chimed in, rushing to accuse him of using his power to bully others. None of them felt that they had done anything wrong. Only Hizonwei, who had caused the trouble, became silent. Refined, Fantasia saw that the other party's words were threatening, and there was no sign of reconciliation. When he heard that word, he couldn't help but have a hint of mockery in his reply. A scholar cannot be learned without learning, and cannot be learned without ambition. Look at you so-called scholars. Instead of studying in the academy, you come to Ishur Tavern to drink and make merry. What is your aim? Where is your refinement? Apart from Guo Baoquan, the rest of the people at the table were scholars of great talent. When they heard this, their faces changed. A scholar scolded, "Don't think you can use your Fan family's power to speak so impudently." Fantasia frowned slightly. He had originally thought that his side was not so bold and confident, but seeing the faces of these scholars, he couldn't help but feel disgusted. "You say that the Fan family uses its power to bully others," he said. "I dare not defend myself. On the other hand, all of you are sitting at this table, drinking wine and chatting merrily with the son of the current minister of the imperial court. You are really not afraid of power and are proud of yourselves. I really admire you." The meaning behind these gentle words couldn't be any clearer. Everyone in the building quietened down. The people sitting at the same table as Guabalquin were furious and were about to argue. Guabalquin waved his fan twice and was about to open his mouth to teach this young man a lesson. However, Fancien's personality was actually a bit strange. He appeared to be gentle, but once he was unhappy, he liked to make others unhappy. Furthermore, he didn't like to give the other party any leeway to retaliate or talk back. So he didn't wait for the minister of the imperial court's son to speak. He pointed at the fan in Guabalquin's hand and smiled. "When I first came to the capital, I saw all the scholars playing around all day. They were all skin and bones, and yet they still had to use a fan to fan themselves. Is that what they call strength of character? That kind of strength of character is something I would never dare to learn." Guabalquin had been in and out of the royal palace and was friends with the crown prince. He had never been treated like this. He was so angry that he put away the fan in his hand and slammed it on the table. He was so angry that his whole body shook and he couldn't speak. After the kingdom of Qing was ruled by martial law, it placed great importance on the literary style. Young scholars were everywhere in the capital, and at least 70 to 80% of the people in Esher Tavern were scholars. And these scholars, which one of them didn't have the evil habit of holding a fan? Hearing Fancien's loaded words about strength of character, not only did the people at Izongwei's table fly into a rage, but everyone else on the third floor also stood up. In reality, Fancien had always disliked these so-called scholars. He had a feeling for them, and as someone who had lived two lives, he was naturally more free and unrestrained, so he blurted it out. But now, seeing the strange atmosphere in the tavern, he realized that he seemed to have angered everyone. But there was nothing to be afraid of. He smiled and cupped his hands in salute. For some reason, when the scholars saw the radiant smile on this young man's face, they felt that their anger had dissipated by a large half. But Guabalquin's anger did not subside. Gnashing his teeth, he threw his fan on the table and gave the signal to attack. Scholars belittling each other was just a matter of words, and the two sides of this confrontation were the sons of high-ranking officials and aristocratic families. So a dangerous atmosphere began to float in the air. Teng Zijing stared coldly at the expert bodyguard of the Guo family, ready to protect his master at any time. With two pa-pa sounds, the two silhouettes overlapped each other. The wind from their fists rose in all directions, causing the powerless scholars in the tavern to cry out in alarm. In the battles of the rich and powerful in the capital, the servants and bodyguards fought to the death, while the masters watched from the sidelines in a boring game. Very few people would involve themselves in it. But Fancien was very different from the sons of the rich and powerful. After Teng Zijing and the expert bodyguard of the Guo family fought, he quietly moved forward. Amidst the rain of moves, he found a fleeting gap and stretched out his fist. With a crisp bang, the fierce fighting that everyone had expected came to an abrupt end. Fancien withdrew his right hand and stood where he was with a smile, as if he had not moved at all. The expert of the Guo family was already crouching on the ground. The bridge of his nose had been broken by that punch. Blood flowed out, and so did tears. Fancien was very satisfied with the effect of this punch. Teacher Fei had taught him correctly. Breaking that spot was a pain that even a 9th-level master could not endure. Guabalquin saw with his own eyes that his most capable bodyguard had been punched into the ground like a puppy. He turned pale with fright and pointed at Fancien. In a trembling voice, he said, "If you dare to bully me with numbers." Fancien glanced at him and shook his head, feeling a little baffled. When it came to fighting, of course they had to do it together. He was not a bored swordsman in the Jianghu. He took Ruo's hand behind him and confidently walked down the stairs. It never occurred to him that his previous actions were completely against some of the established rules of this world. Chapter 51. Everyone in the building was dumbstruck and speechless. They had seen fights before, but they had never seen a son of a noble family enter the fray. Even if someone had been lucky enough to see such a rare scene, they had probably never seen such a fair and square two-on-one fight. Even Tung Zijing was a little depressed. Although he was much weaker than the master of the Guo family, the young master's actions had made him lose face. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. He thought of the comical scene from before. How could the young master see through such a complicated situation so clearly? Furthermore, that punch seemed to be messing around, but in reality, the power and angle were terrifyingly accurate. When he looked at Fan Xian again, there was a hint of awe and amazement in his eyes. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the Fan family was about to go downstairs when a private room in the corner of the building was pushed open. A few people came out, presumably having heard the argument outside, and had come out to see what was going on. One of them, dressed in luxurious clothing, looked at Fan Ruo, and his eyes brightened. He came forward and bowed. "Sister Ruo, it's rare to see you out of the manner." The newcomer was handsome, with thick eyebrows and clear eyes, a straight nose, and thin lips. He looked like a fine man. Fan Ruo bowed in surprise. "The Crown Prince is here too." She quickly introduced Fan Xian to the man. Fan Xian had not expected this to be the Crown Prince of Prince Jing, who was on good terms with his family. Prince Jing and the Fan family had always been on good terms, so he had a good understanding of their family. As soon as Fan Ruo introduced him, the Crown Prince immediately guessed who Fan Xian was, and couldn't help but feel slightly surprised. He saw that Fan Xian's speech was neither servile nor overbearing, and that there was an indescribable self-confidence in his bones. The smile on his face was warm and amiable, and he couldn't help but feel very comfortable. At that moment, the palace editor, Guo Baoquan, also came to pay his respects to the Crown Prince. Someone else told the Crown Prince about the small conflict between the Guo and Fan families. After hearing this, the Crown Prince was greatly interested. He asked Fan Xian, "Brother, you seem to have a problem with scholars. Everyone can study, and everyone is a scholar," Fan Xian replied, bowing to the Crown Prince. In his mind, there was no concept of class division in this era, and he didn't think that reading a few stereotyped sentences would make him a person who transcended the common people of industry and commerce. "I also study. How would I dare to have an opinion about scholars? It's just that," he smiled and continued, "I just have a problem with the so-called gifted scholars." As soon as he said this, everyone in the building revealed a curious expression. They wanted to see what this disciple of a noble family who used blackboxing would say. Even the Crown Prince asked with great interest, "Brother, why do you look down on the so-called gifted scholars?" The Crown Prince was rather polite, but because Fan Xian had not formally acknowledged his ancestry, he could only call him brother and not mention anything else. At least, he did not mention his surname. Fan Xian understood the rules of this society very well, and was not angry at all. He smiled and explained, "The reason why I have a problem with scholars is because I feel that there is something wrong with the way things are nowadays. It seems that if a scholar is willing to go to a brothel, he will become a scholar. I'm afraid this scholar has too much cosmetics and too little scholarly air. It won't be beneficial to the country, but it will benefit those women instead." Although his words were somewhat bitter, they were not malicious. It sounded more like a joke. The Crown Prince's heir laughed, and the people in the restaurant also laughed. This matter was considered to have been resolved. After all, in the eyes of others, this young master of the Fan family, who had come out of nowhere, seemed to have some friendship with the Crown Prince. As for Guo Baoquan's side, it seemed that they were no match for Fan Xian in a fight, and they were no match for him in an argument either. They could only reluctantly drop the matter. The Crown Prince invited Fan Xian in for a drink, but Fan Xian politely declined on the pretext of returning to his manor. They only agreed to meet again the next day, and the Fan family left the restaurant. Just as they left the restaurant and were about to get into the carriage, the scholar, named He Zhongwei, hurried down. He looked into Fan Xian's eyes and very sincerely thanked him. "What are you thanking me for?" Fan Xian asked with a smile. He Zhongwei replied with a smile, "I have always looked down on the rich and powerful, and I have always prided myself on this. Today you have pointed it out, and I now know that I just like this feeling. Deep in my bones, I can't get rid of those stereotypes." Fan Xian frowned slightly. He felt that this person's attitude had changed a little too quickly. Although he did not like this seemingly honest scholar, the reason for the conflict was that the other party was fighting for him, the author of Dream of the Red Chamber. Therefore, he smiled and explained, "Everyone has a cowardly part in their bodies. It's just that they need certain things to force this part out. This is the so-called small part under the scholar's robe. Today, I was just speaking nonsense. I hope you don't take offense." The small part under the scholar's robe? His own way seemed to be thinking about something. He came to his senses and bowed deeply to Fan Ruruo, who was standing next to Fan Xian. He then turned around and went upstairs without looking back. Fan Xian saw that the dark-skinned scholar's face seemed to be a little red, and only then did he know what was going on. He looked at his sister with a face full of ridicule, but Fan Ruo's face was calm, as if the dark-skinned scholar had never been there. Knowing that He Zhongwei's love was unrequited, Fan Xian did not have much sympathy. In his plans, his sister's future husband did not necessarily have to be a noble, but he had to be someone that his sister liked. After Fan Xian left, Guobaoquan, He Zhongwei, and the other scholars at the table also left the building. The third floor of the Stone Tavern gradually returned to normal, but the guests at the other tables were still talking about the young master from Fan Manor. They had never heard of such a person in Count Sinan's household, and they all guessed that he was a cousin of Miss Fan. Crown Prince Jing naturally knew of Fan Xian's identity, but he could not speak to the idle people outside the room. He poured himself a cup of wine and slowly drank it. He faintly sighed. Everyone says that the Crown Prince loves literature and often associates with the upper class. Now it seems that among the people he associates with, there is not a single decent talent. An advisor pondered for a moment. He Zhongwei is a student of Tseng Wenxiang. He will definitely pass the imperial examinations next year. I wonder what he is like. Crown Prince Jing shook his head. This He Zhongwei is talented, but his temperament is... He had actually heard the conversation outside from the side room. At this time, he thought of the comment about his strength of character. He laughed and said, "His strength of character is indeed lacking." The advisor also laughed. That illegitimate child that Master Fan has been hiding for over 10 years is quite interesting. Crown Prince Jing patted the fan in his hand. He was about to praise Fan Xian when he suddenly remembered Fan Xian's teasing words. He quickly put the fan back on the table and laughed. That Guobaoquan relies on his father's power, and because he is on good terms with the Crown Prince, he does not care about Fan Manor. It is not easy for such a mediocre person to survive until now. Chapter 52. As a member of the royal family, Crown Prince Jing naturally knew of the relationship between His Majesty and the Fan family. He was a little lost in thought as he heard his advisor say, but that Fan Xian came to the capital in a hurry, and today in a restaurant. It's not too flashy, but it's a bit impetuous. Crown Prince Jing waved his hand and said, "It's always good for a young man to be a bit impulsive." He spoke as if he didn't have the self-awareness that he was only in his early 20s. Thinking of the friendly smile on the face of the young Fan family, the Crown Prince's lips curled into a smile of admiration. Furthermore, the Fan family is currently planning that marriage. If Fan Xian is too low-key, it's not appropriate. I think that after today, the people of the capital will know that the Fan family has produced a beautiful and clean young master. Suddenly, he came to his senses. He slapped his forehead and said with a smile, "When I asked you to be my advisor, we agreed that you were only allowed to help me with my affairs. My father is an idle prince who doesn't care about politics. As a son, I can't be disobedient. Come, come, come." He called out to the people at the table and began to drink. Everyone at the table quickly responded, but in their hearts, they were thinking, if you are really willing to be an idle prince, then why are you so close to the Fan family? And why are you so close to the second prince? After getting into the carriage, it was quiet all the way. After a while, Fan Ro burst into laughter. Fan Xian asked curiously, "What's so funny?" Fan Ro put her hand on her chest and breathed lightly. After a while, she said, "I'm thinking about what you said earlier. It's really mean." "What did you say?" Fan Xian felt that he had said too much in the restaurant today, completely violating his principles of being low-key. He felt that it was inappropriate. It's that line, every day they play around, they're all skin and bones, and they still use a fan to fan themselves. Is that what they call strength of character? Fan Ro imitated his tone and couldn't help but purse her lips and laugh. Fan Xizha also laughed foolishly, but found that the other two people in the carriage weren't paying much attention to him. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. Strength of character is excellent, but it's not something that only scholars have. Previously, when I saw those so-called scholars looking up at the sky with their nostrils up, I was annoyed. Each and every one of them ate their fill all day long and only knew how to talk and cause trouble. If you have the guts, don't take the imperial examinations and don't sit with that Guishuahua. When it comes to matters of power and nobility, we should knock them down and step on them. Just putting on a pose really doesn't have any future. Hearing this, Fan Ruo couldn't help but laugh. Her brother's tone was different from everyone else's in this world. Perhaps only she could understand the meaning behind it. Just now, Crown Prince Jing was next to us. Older brother must have had some reservations when speaking. Fan Ro really wanted to know what her older brother truly thought of these scholars. "No, but my tone is much more gentle." Fan Xian smiled. "I'm not opposed to places like brothels, and I don't think a gifted scholar can't go there. But I've always felt that a brothel customer is a brothel customer. If he goes to a brothel and still wants to pretend to be a scholar, then he's just like a prostitute, extremely hypocritical." In her mind, her brother was a true scholar. Didn't his words include himself? Fan Xian laughed. "There are no outsiders here." He suddenly looked at his sister. "Remember, girl, marry anyone, but don't marry a scholar." Fan Xian laughed. "After all, there are no outsiders here." He suddenly looked at his sister seriously. "Remember, girl, marry anyone, but don't marry a scholar." Fan Xian laughed. "There are no outsiders here." He suddenly looked at his sister. "Remember, girl, marry anyone, but don't marry a scholar." "That he's Zhong Wei, what is he doing now?" Fan Xizha rushed to answer. "He's a student of the Imperial College. He comes from a poor family, but it is said that he is a student of scholar Tseng Wenxiang of the Library of the Virtuous. He's always had a bit of a reputation, and he's composed a few poems. Everyone expects him to be in the top 3 in next year's imperial examinations." Fan Xian frowned and said to his sister, "He looks honest, but he's actually very patient and good at acting. I don't like people with that kind of personality. You have to be careful in the future and try not to interact with him." Ruoro nodded without hesitation. In her mind, Fan Xian was her brother, her teacher, and the person she could rely on the most. Fan Xian was thinking about that dark-faced scholar called He Zhong Wei. Since he was already a famous scholar in the capital, if he wanted to join a noble family, he should have many options. If it wasn't for his sister, he wouldn't have had to jump out earlier. Was he trying to leave a good impression? Fan Xian's lips curled into a smile. To be able to discover his identity and position in Ruo's heart in such a short time, it seemed that this so-called scholar was not simple. He turned his head and saw Fan Xizha, who was leaning against the window, looking out. Fan Xian felt a slight chill in his heart. He said to Ruo, "Go back to the manor with him later. I'm going to walk around the capital for a while." Fan Xizha turned his head from the window, his face a little blank. Fan Xian looked at his face and thought of how he had faced assassination attempts when he was 12 years old. He also thought of the fact that the man was only a 12-year-old child and had been dragged into these dangerous things. He couldn't help but sigh. "You're so young. I really don't know what to say." Fan Xizha hid behind his sister in fear. He had always been bold, but for some reason, Every time he saw the gentle smile on Fan Xian's face, he felt a little afraid. What are you talking about? Fan Xian had originally thought that the conflict in the restaurant had been deliberately provoked by the young man in front of him in order to expose a very bad side of himself in front of Crown Prince Jing. He knew that the opinion of Crown Prince Jing would play a role in the future inheritance of the Fan Manor, because he was the one who had chosen the restaurant, and he was the one who had caused the trouble. But now, seeing the blank expression on Fan Xi's face, he couldn't help but doubt his own judgment. Could it be that everything that had happened in the restaurant was just a coincidence? The carriage slowly moved forward. Fan Xian knew that of the 6 guards who had accompanied him and his sister, at least 2 of them were from the Liu family, so he didn't say anything. Fan Ro had been calm the whole time. She lowered her head in silence, thinking of the things that had happened at home and feeling a little depressed. The carriage arrived at the main street in front of the Fan Manor. Ro led her brother back to the manor, while Fan Xian continued his one-day tour of the capital. Fan Ro had wanted to go with him, but thinking of what he had to do later, he could only smile and decline. He looked at Fan Xizha again and told him not to tell anyone about Dream of the Red Chamber, but he wasn't sure if he would listen. Tung Zijing sat in the carriage, looking at his young master. He didn't know when, but Tung Zijing had decided that he would have a bright future if he followed this 16-year-old young master. Perhaps it was because the spring in Danzhou made one's imagination go wild, or perhaps he had been influenced by the young man in front of him, or perhaps the 2 of them had reached some sort of agreement. Fan Xian thought for a moment, then rested his chin on his hand. I asked my father to bring you here. I don't think you'll have a chance to make a name for yourself in the near future. Don't blame me. Tung Zijing smiled and replied respectfully, Young master is not an ordinary person. Of course, following the young master will bring benefits. Fan Xian laughed. What's so unusual about me? Earlier in the restaurant, I was just like any other ignorant teenager, spitting all over the place. Tung Zijing tried to figure out what Fan Xian meant, and carefully replied, Young master, I understand what you're saying. I don't think this has anything to do with the young master. The carriage had already stopped, and a cool breeze blew in through the curtains, making one feel refreshed. Fan Xian looked at Tung Zijing and said gently, I also hope this has nothing to do with him. Chapter 53. Along the way, Fan Xian had arranged for Tung Zijing to sit in his carriage, so these words were not hidden from him. Frowning, he said, This is too much of a coincidence. I had just arrived in the capital, and I shouldn't have gotten into a fight with anyone. Yet Xizha followed me all day, and when the fight broke out in the restaurant, Crown Prince Jing happened to be there. This kind of coincidence is hard to explain. Tung Zijing laughed. The young master may be rude and unreasonable, but he is not a bad person. The second wife would not dare let him handle such a thing. He continued, The second wife only has one son, and he is not good at studying or martial arts. All he does is eat and drink and go around showing off. So the second wife looks down on him. A bitter smile appeared on Fan Xian's lips. It's precisely because she knows her son can't be helped that Lady Liu is so cruel to me. Mothers seem to be very stubborn. Lady Liu, she wants the outside world to think that the illegitimate son of the Fan family is just an incompetent hedonistic son. Tung Zijing said, Perhaps you don't know this, but whenever the young master goes out, he always causes trouble. So the second wife has him follow you out. She doesn't need to make any arrangements, and you will naturally get caught up in the fight. So you mean that if I go out with him, I will naturally become a hedonistic son in the eyes of the world? Correct. Tung Zijing smiled. The second wife's idea is simple, but it seems to be very effective. Fan Xian laughed. This Lady Liu is very interesting. She actually thinks that Xizha is a black ink pot, and that she might as well mix them together. Interesting. I just didn't expect Crown Prince Jing to be in the restaurant, Tung Zijing replied. Tung Zijing replied, Young master, you handled the situation appropriately. Although your words seem to have offended some of the scholars, all scholars are proud and aloof. The people of the capital may think that you are arrogant, but it is better than thinking that you are incompetent. Is creating public opinion really that important? Fan Xian laughed. Is the Fan family really that popular? Is Lady Lu really that simple-minded as a pure woman? He looked at Teng Zijing. These are all problems, but they are not my problem. Teng Zijing asked curiously, Young master, what is your problem? Fan Xian's beautiful face was distressed. My problem is, to this day, I still don't know what my fiancée looks like, and whether or not she's really sick to death. The carriage stopped at an alley on the side of Tianhe Street. Looking into the distance, the government offices of the various departments were still open for business. The eaves of the buildings were like phoenixes pointing to the sky. At the furthest point, there was a square house with nothing special, standing there, looking very gloomy. Fan Xian did not let Teng Zijing follow him. Although it seemed that Teng Zijing had already made up his mind to bet his future on Fan Xian knew that he was not Song Chili. He did not have the ability to subdue people. After all, Teng Zijing was his father's personal follower, so there were some things that Fan Xian could not let him know. In front of a stall selling Tonghalu, he confirmed the location of the Overwatch Council. He bought a stick and chewed on it as he walked, chewing on it until his teeth were about to fall off. It was so satisfying. Passing by a bookstore, he walked in and looked around. He found that it was filled with historical collections that had been read countless times. He called over the clerk and asked in a low voice, Do you have Story of the Stone? A strange smile appeared on the clerk's face, and he replied in a very low voice, Please follow me, sir. There was no need to avoid people. In a small compartment next to the main hall, the clerk took out a set of books and handed them to Fan Xian. Fan Xian took a look. It was exactly the same as the one he had bought from the ante earlier that day. He nodded in satisfaction and paid for the book. Leave the books here. Someone from Fan Manor will come to pick them up later. The first book had already been taken back to Fan Manor by his sister. These books were too heavy for him, so Fan Xian planned to have the servants come to pick them up later. The clerk was troubled. Which Fan Manor? Count Sinan's manor. Fan Xian wondered if there were more Fan Manors. He really didn't know. The Fan clan was a large clan in the capital, and Count Sinan was only a concubine. It was only in the last decade, or so that because of the old lady, they had flourished and become the most famous of the Fan clan. The clerk replied respectfully, wrapped up the books, and put them on the counter. Fan Xian casually asked a few more questions about how the book was selling. After getting the answers, he cursed the bootleg bookseller in his heart. Seeing that the customer did not leave immediately after buying the books, the clerk could only smile and chat with him. During this question and answer, the tip of Fan Xian's ears moved imperceptibly. As he smiled and chatted with the clerk, he slowly circulated his jinqi. His hearing suddenly became more acute, and he immediately found the sound he was looking for in the quiet environment of the bookstore. Their breathing was different from that of the common people. The breathing sounds were long and distant, and it was obvious that they were people with jinqi. Fan Xian knew that these were people sent by his father to protect or monitor him, and he frowned. The clerk saw the customer suddenly frown. Although he felt that the frown of this beautiful young man was also very beautiful, he thought that he had said something wrong and couldn't help but feel uneasy. Leaving the bookstore through the back door, Fan Xian confirmed that he had successfully shaken off the two attendants behind him. He felt a little proud of himself, thinking about the things he had learned from Fei Jie when he was young. Apart from using poison, he had also learned anti-stalking skills. They had finally come in handy. He followed the crowd on Tianhe Street, walking along the flagstones, looking at the buildings on both sides of the street. These buildings were ancient, especially in front of them. On each side of the road was a gentle stream of water. If one wanted to get to the yamen from the road, they would have to cross the small wooden bridge over the stream. The water was as smooth as a mirror, reflecting the shadow of the bridge and the branches of the green trees that stretched over the water. It looked very serene and beautiful. Occasionally, petals from the peach blossom bushes in the distance would be blown off by the wind, floating on the water. He walked along the side of the road, looking at the falling water under his feet. A satisfied smile appeared on his lips. In the few days he had been in the capital, he had always thought about complicated things. It was a far cry from his original intention of experiencing life, and his mind was a little tired. Now that he had been refreshed by the capital's spring scenery, he suddenly felt much better. Arriving at the entrance of the Overwatch Council, Fan Xian frowned as he looked at the limestone building. He felt that this yamen was a little too ugly and did not match the antique buildings around it. But when he thought of Fei Jie's ugly face, he had no choice but to admit it. It was true that the building suited the person. Walking into the building, Fan Xian found it strange that the officials and passers-by all around him were looking at him. Or rather, they were looking at him with strange eyes. He carefully looked at himself to make sure that there was nothing that could attract attention, and then he raised his head, but the curious gazes around him did not change. Chapter 54. Grabbing hold of a passing scribe, Fan Xian looked at his lifeless face. For some reason, Fan Xian felt a little nervous, but at the same time, he felt a sense of familiarity. It was as if he had found the old comrade, Fei Jie. He smiled sweetly and greeted him. Hello. The owner of the lifeless face, like the rest of the people in the Overwatch Council, looked at Fan Xian with a strange expression. After a while, he said, hello. These two words were said a little stiffly. Fan Xian swallowed and smiled. This is very presumptuous of me, but why is everyone staring at me? The man laughed, revealing his pale white teeth. He found this young man with a shy smile very interesting. He asked, if a stranger suddenly appeared in a place where no stranger had ever entered, wouldn't everyone stare at him? Fan Xian suddenly understood, but then he was confused. Isn't this the yamen of the Overwatch Council? Has no stranger ever come to the government to handle official business? The man pointed outside the door and kindly explained, look over there. Fan Xian took a look and saw that there was no one at the entrance of the Overwatch Council. The people on the street were walking along the other side of the street. The man laughed, but it was a horrifying smile. The old skin on his cheeks wrinkled together. The people of the capital have always avoided our yamen. As for official business, we, the Overwatch Council, never handle official business. His Majesty has decreed that the other 6 yamens are not allowed to get involved in the affairs of the council, so we have never had any dealings with the other yamens. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. So that's how it is. It seems that I really am a reckless trespasser. The man asked curiously, you don't know what the Overwatch Council does? Fan Xian replied, I know a little. After all, he was a student of Fei Jie of the 3rd Bureau of the Overwatch Council. He knew a little about the Overwatch Council's functions, and yet you dared to barge in like this. The man shrugged. Most people would think of this place as Yama's palace. Fan Xian smiled helplessly. Perhaps it's because I saw Yama when I was very young? The man laughed and patted his shoulder. Very good, very good. The skin on Fan Xian's right shoulder under his clothes grew a little goosebumps. He felt that the man's tone was like Sun Earnyang's. Is there anything I can help you with? The man smiled. Fan Xian immediately felt as if the man had turned into a hotel receptionist from his previous life who spoke in English. He shook his head to get rid of this untimely distraction. He took out a piece of silver from his sleeve and handed it over. Is Fei Jie here? He asked politely. The man was stunned. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Immediately after, Fan Xian noticed that the man's expression was no longer indifferent, but respectful with a hint of fear. Are you looking for Master Fei? As he said this, he flicked his finger beautifully, sending the silver pieces Fan Xian had stuffed into his sleeve back into Fan Xian's sleeve. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He knew that while this move seemed simple, it was actually very beautiful. At the very least, he had been immersed in martial arts for over a decade to be able to be so accurate. Only now did he realize that this seemingly ordinary Overwatch Council official was actually a hidden ace. Fan Xian nodded, admitting that he had come to find Fei Jie. He then noticed that the man was vigorously wiping the right hand that had patted his shoulder. Master Fei is not here, the man replied politely. He discreetly took a few steps back, putting some distance between himself and Fan Xian. Master Fei has gone to the border to supervise. Fan Xian slapped his forehead. Only now did he remember that Tang Zijing had said that the director of the Overwatch Council would be returning home for at least 3 months. Given Fei Jie's lazy temper, the only person who could control him was not here, so naturally he would slip away. He excused himself from the man and prepared to leave. Before he left, Fan Xian suddenly smiled and asked, "Sir, what is your name?" "I am Wang Qinian." The Overwatch Council official, Wang Qinian, saw that this young man, with a slightly bashful smile, dared to come to the Overwatch Council alone and call Master Fei Jie by his name. He knew that this young man was no ordinary person, so he called himself I. Fan Xian knew that when the man heard that he was looking for Fei Jie, he unconsciously associated him with something dangerous like poison. That was why he wiped his hand and retreated. He looked at Wang Qinian with a smile. "If Master Fei returns, please inform him that his student has come to the capital." "Fei Jie's student?" Wang Qinian felt the urge to chop off his own right hand. He silently cursed himself for his fondness for touching things. He coughed and agreed. Walking out of the Overwatch Council's main gate, the sun shone down through the tall trees on either side of the road. The shadows of countless leaves enveloped Fan Xian's body. He walked west for a while and sat on the railing next to the running water. He rested his hands on the sides of his body and looked at the crowd on the street. For a moment, he didn't know where to go. He didn't want to go back to Fan Manor. Although there was a gentle and kind sister there, when he thought of Lady Lu, his father, and that chubby boy who should have been happily studying every day but was now forced to compete with him, he felt a little uncomfortable. What belonged to him? He bravely fought for it. He would not give up. However, Fan Xian was still not sure what truly belonged to him in this world. After all, he had experienced another life before, and there was always a sense of distance between him and this world. He hid the fact that he had come to the Overwatch Council to find Fei Jie from his father. Although his father knew that Fei Jie was his teacher, Fan Xian still felt that Fei Jie was more trustworthy. Perhaps it was because he had not been in this world for long, and had begun following old Fei around looking for corpses, which gave him a sense of closeness. Fei Jie's teacher was not in the capital. This fact made the arrangements he had made before entering the capital a little problematic. So he was thinking about what he should do next. As he thought about these things, he jumped down from the railing and began a walk back. When he passed by the Overwatch Council again, he noticed that the people on the street were indeed walking on the right side of the street, avoiding the council's main gate. It was as if they were afraid of the sinister aura that seeped out of the building. He squinted at the entrance of the building. The thin clouds in the sky suddenly parted, and the clear sunlight shone down. His eyes were blinded by a golden light. Rubbing his eyes, he looked towards the golden light and found that there was a wide tablet in front of the Overwatch Council. It looked like a crouching tiger crouching on the ground. The tablet was made of stone, and a few words were written on it. Fan Xian frowned. He felt that these words were somewhat familiar, as if he had seen them somewhere before. But no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't figure out where they had come from. His gaze moved downwards, and he saw the inscription. It was a somewhat unfamiliar, but incomparably familiar name. Chapter 55. Yi Qingmei. Fan Xian was incomparably shocked. Unconsciously, he quietly said the name. He could never have imagined that his mother's name would appear on the stone tablet in front of the Overwatch Council. His face remained calm, but his heart was in turmoil. Why would his mother's name appear on the stone tablet in front of the Overwatch Council? Although Miss Yi had been the wealthiest woman in the world, she could not have enjoyed such treatment that not even the emperor could. Furthermore, his mother's mysterious death must have had something to do with the nobility of the kingdom of Qing. Although Wu Zhu had said that the Yi family's enemies had all been killed in the storm 10 years ago, who could guarantee that the relatives of those enemies were not left behind in the court? Even now, Yi Qingmei was clearly a taboo name. The Yi family's wealth had all been transferred to the palace treasury, and the Yi family's business had become royal merchants. The Overwatch Council had brazenly put Yi Qingmei's name in front of their door. Although Wu Zhu had said that few people in the world knew that his mother was called Yi Qingmei, the royal family of the kingdom of Qing must have known. Director Chun was a bit too bold. Did he not care about the royal family's reputation? However, after seeing the short stone tablet, Fan Xian finally understood what Uncle Wu Zhu had said in Danzhou. Not many people know that the young lady was called Yi Qing Mei. The people around her just call her young lady. But the name Yi Qing Mei, even now, is very famous in the capital. Fan Xian rubbed his hands and walked forward with his head down. He thought that with such a tablet in front of the Overwatch Council that everyone in the capital feared, it would be difficult for the name Yi Qing Mei not to be famous. All these mental activities happened in a very short period of time. He restrained the expression on his face, pulled up his sleeves, and expressionlessly walked east, as if he did not see the name. It was because he saw the tablet that Fan Xian could not help but think of the Prime Minister's daughter he was about to marry. According to his father, her mother, the eldest princess, was now in charge of the Yi family's business. If there was anything in this world that he felt he should have, this business would be at the top of the list. It was a very strange feeling. From Tung Zijing, Fan Xian had already found out where Miss Lin lived. But knowing her background and identity, and knowing that the capital was a place of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, he did not dare to sneak off to spy on her. He had come to the Overwatch Council to find teacher Fei Jia. He wanted to use the Overwatch Council's heaven-defying methods to find a way to meet the woman who was entangled in Mion's sickbed. At the same time, he wanted to ask Fei Jia to help take a look at the girl's condition. Unexpectedly, Fei Jia was not in the capital. Fan Xian was a little annoyed. Did he really have to wait until they consummated their marriage to find out what Fei Jia looked like? No, he warned himself. He had to find a way to peep. If something went wrong, he would have time to prepare for his escape. As he walked, Fan Xian became even more annoyed. He had just arrived in the capital, and he was completely unfamiliar with the roads. He walked back and forth on Tianhe Avenue twice, but he couldn't find where his family's carriage was. Coincidentally, he saw a child holding a stick of candied hawthorn and was chewing on it as he walked. Taking a whiff of the sweet smell, Fan Xian felt it to be very familiar. He rushed forward, snatched it, and took a bite. Based on the taste, he confirmed that it was from the same stall as the one he had eaten before. Only then did he ask where the stall was. The child was frightened. He thought he had run into a candied hawthorn robber. Finally, Fan Xian calmed down with 2 copper coins and pointed him in a direction. Fan Xian followed the direction and walked for a long time. Sadly, he found that the child was taking revenge on him. This place was clearly not where he should be. He was already at the edge of the capital. Fan Xian did not know this. Otherwise, he would have been very proud of the strength of his legs and sad about his intelligence. This place was very desolate. There was a temple. In the bustling capital, to find such a desolate place was not an easy task. To say it was desolate was not accurate. To be precise, it was unusually clean. Not a speck of dust could be seen on the pillars and eaves of the temple. He raised his head to look at the black wooden structure in front of him. He couldn't help but think of the Temple of Heaven in his previous life in Beijing. The temple in front of him was much smaller. It seemed to have less of a mysterious connection to the heavens and more of a worldly elegance. The front door was painted dark black. It looked very dignified. On the door was a flat horizontal board with the words Temple of Qing written on it. Fan Xian licked the sugar off his teeth. Looking at the 2 sacred yellow words above his head, an indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. This was the Temple of Qing. According to legend, the only place in the kingdom of Qing that could communicate with the illusory temple, the temple where the royal family worshipped heaven. Back in Danzhou, Fei Jia had said that the Temple of Heaven was 3 li away from the palace in the capital. Fan Xian had always thought it was 3 li away from the palace. He had no idea that 3 li away was actually a place. Fan Xian's mouth fell open. Before he came to the capital, he had thought that since no one in this world could find a temple, he had to go to the Temple of Heaven to take a look. He didn't know if he could find the answer to the question that had been haunting him for 16 years. Why did he come to this world? In the novels he read in his previous life, Xiang Xiaolong had a reason. Later on, the transmigrators also had a reason. Later on, there was no need for a reason. But Fan Xian himself was deeply puzzled. He needed a reason that could explain why he had been reborn into this world when he was clearly dead. He had never imagined that the child's random directions would lead him to the Temple of Qing. This realization made him feel slightly dizzy. Perhaps there was some kind of mysterious connection between him and the temple. There was some kind of miraculous fate. He firmly believed in this. He firmly believed in the fate brought about by a stick of Tonghalu. Stepping forward, Fan Xian was surrounded by silence. He gently pushed open the heavy wooden door that seemed to have not been opened for many years. "Stop!" A loud shout came. Chapter 56. Fan Xian was startled. He had thought this place was sacred and quiet, but suddenly there was such a roar. Looking carefully, he realized that there was someone inside the temple. The person blocking his way was a middle-aged man with sunken eyes and a hooked nose. He looked very sinister. Seeing the man staring at him, Fan Xian felt a little unhappy. He thought about the classics and history he had read. According to the rules of the royal city, the Temple of Qing was a place that everyone could come to. Not only did this man hide behind the door to scare people, but he also put on a posture like an eagle hunting a rabbit. Who the hell would want to be a rabbit? Fan Xian frowned. "Sir, your voice is so loud. Are you not afraid of deafening us?" Unexpectedly, the middle-aged man's expression was unusually serious. He pushed Fan Xian forward and said in a low voice, "Leave quickly. There are people in the temple who are praying. Do not disturb them." The man was clearly dressed as a follower of a wealthy family, but his tone was very official. Fan Xian did not notice this. Ever since he had dug graves with teacher Fei as a child, he had developed a slight obsession with cleanliness. Seeing the hand coming closer and closer, he frowned and crossed his hands, twisting them around the man's wrist. There was a light snap. The two men, one big and one small, looked at each other in surprise. They found that their methods were very similar. It was like two snakes intertwining, unable to tear each other apart. "Ah!" The middle-aged man let out a light sound. His eyes shone brightly, and a hidden force flowed out like a great river, attacking Fan Xian's body from his wrist. Fan Xian grunted. He had not expected to run into such an expert. He felt a burning sensation on his back, and the tyrannical Jinchi that had been quiet for many years reacted in an instant. It shot out from his dantian and met the man's attack head-on. There was a soft hum. The dust on the stone steps was blown up by the collision of the two hidden forces, forming a strange gray ball that quickly dispersed. The two men were shaken several steps apart. The middle-aged man covered his mouth and coughed. Fan Xian's face was expressionless, as if there was no problem. The middle-aged man looked at him coldly. "So young, and yet you have such tyrannical Jinchi. Which family are you from? Why do you care who I am? I only want to enter the temple to pray. What right do you have to stop me?" Fan Xian looked at him coldly. "There is a noble in the temple. Young man, wait for a moment." The middle-aged man felt that his opponent's technique was similar to his own. He thought that his opponent might be a disciple of some great family in the capital, and that he was acquainted with him. That was why he gradually dispersed the killing intent in his heart. A hint of a smile flashed in Fan Xian's eyes. In the laws of the Kingdom of Qing, there is no rule stating that one needs to line up to worship the temple. The middle-aged man furrowed his brows. He felt that this young man was very annoying. With a wave of his sleeve, he entered the temple, leaving Fan Xian outside. Fan Xian opened his mouth to speak, but his chest felt stuffy and his throat tasted sweet. He quickly pulled out a handkerchief from his sleeve and covered his mouth. Fortunately, at the critical moment when the hidden forces collided, his right index finger quietly flicked the opponent's pulse. It was all because his understanding of the human body structure was more profound than that of these martial arts masters. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would have suffered more serious injuries. At this moment, when he looked at the heavy wooden door again, there was an additional trace of fear in his eyes. He no longer dared to try to push this seemingly immovable door. Fan Xian coughed twice. A trace of determination appeared on his handsome face. Since he could not beat the opponent, he He could only retreat and wait for another day to fight. Just as he turned to leave, he found that the wooden door behind him had opened again. The middle-aged master who had injured him stood at the door and said coldly, "The master has ordered that the young man should go to the side hall to pray. Do not enter the main hall." After saying this, he added, "Do not enter the main hall. Do you hear me?" Fan Xian turned around and looked at the middle-aged man. He then looked at the seemingly unfathomable and eerie temple of Qing. His brows furrowed, and with a wave of his sleeves, he stepped over the high threshold and walked in the direction of the side hall without turning his head. Seeing that the young man, after this setback, was still unhurried and unafraid, and still persisted in his original goal, a trace of admiration flashed in the middle-aged master's eyes. The middle-aged man closed the temple door and furrowed his brows as he looked around. These little bastards actually let the young man walk to the temple door. He had to train them well when he returned tonight. The temple of Qing was a quiet place. The people of Qing were a very realistic people. If the common people wanted to pray, they would rather go to the Dongshan temple to the west of the capital to pray to the child-giving goddess and the immortals who looked like rich landlords. But the people of Qing respected and feared the heavens. The emperor was the so-called son of heaven, so the temple of Qing became a place for the royal family to worship the heavens. Although the temple of Qing was still open to the common people of the capital, no common people liked the heavy pressure of the strict atmosphere. The main hall of the temple of Qing was the building that looked like the temple of heaven. It had 2 layers of round eaves and was very beautiful. The middle-aged man stood respectfully outside the main hall, looking at the nobleman who was holding his hands behind his back and admiring the colorful paintings on the wall. He said in a low voice, "According to the master's wishes, the young man should go to the side hall." The nobleman was about 40 years old. His face could not be said to be heroic, but his eyes had a disdainful expression. It was only a trace of exhaustion that was difficult to detect. Which family does that young man belong to be able to exchange blows with you? The nobleman asked with a smile. The middle-aged man was very skilled in martial arts, but in front of the nobleman, he really was like a follower. He answered honestly, "I do not know. I just reported to the master. The way he walks is similar to the way of the guards in the family." The nobleman was a bit surprised. "Oh, could it be the boy from the Leaf family?" The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. "Although I've always been too lazy to deal with people, I still know Crown Prince Jing." "Oh." The nobleman made another sound and turned his head to look at the frescoes on the wall. He had too many things to consider every day, and it was rare for him to have such leisure time. He did not want to be disturbed by such trivial matters. Earlier, he had allowed the young man to enter the side hall to pray purely because he felt that it was a good thing for the country to have more young talents. The middle-aged man quietly stood guard outside the hall, his eyes occasionally glancing at the side hall. After a long time, there was a commotion outside the hall. The nobleman suddenly frowned. Why is the girl not resting in the back? What's she doing in the side hall? The middle-aged man was slightly surprised. He used all his strength to listen in that direction. He raised his head in shame. "The princess has gone to the side hall." The nobleman frowned. "Nonsense." He suddenly thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. "Go take a look. Also, bring that young man to me." "Yes." The middle-aged man accepted the order and was about to leave. Suddenly, there was the sound of a bird outside the temple of Qing. The temple door was pushed open, and a hurried man ran in. He handed the nobleman a sealed letter. Chapter 57. Fan Xian walked in the direction of the side hall with his head down. Out of the corner of his eye, he looked at the altar of heaven in the main hall. He was curious as to who was praying there, to be able to order around that middle-aged master. He knew that the person's background was unfathomable, and he only wanted to come to the temple of Qing to take a look, so there was no need to fight over this, even though his name was Fan Xian. His right hand was still covering his mouth, and he coughed occasionally. Earlier, he had used Jinqi to travel around his abdomen and confirmed that his body had not suffered any substantial damage. It was just that when the Jinqi had reversed, It had ruptured the fragile membrane between his throat, not his lungs or upper bronchial tubes. He coughed as he walked. Looking at the spots of blood on the white handkerchief, he thought of Lin Daiyu, Su Mongjin, Zhou Yu, Lin Qinan, and many other elders. Ahem, forget about Lin Qinan. She was not as poignant as the other three. By the time he reached the side hall, his Jinshi had already healed most of the small injury. Fan Xian regretfully put away the handkerchief, looked back at the altar of heaven, and walked into the side hall. The side hall was a slightly smaller temple, surrounded by a green stone wall. There was no one inside. Fan Xian found that he did not see the legendary ascetic monks, and felt slightly disappointed. He walked into the hall and was even more disappointed to find that there were no statues of the gods he had seen in his previous life. But thinking about it, this was normal. Since they were worshipping the sky, no one would know what the sky looked like. In the middle of the temple, there was an incense burner. It was very wide, and there was a light yellow satin hanging down to the ground, covering the green stone floor below. On top of the incense burner was an exquisite porcelain incense burner. There were 3 sticks of incense stuck in the burner, and most of the incense sticks had already burned away. The entire room was enveloped in a calming fragrance. Fan Xian wandered around the hall, his eyes sweeping over the colored paintings on the walls. He found that the style of the paintings was very similar to the oil paintings of later generations. But the gods in the paintings, standing on mountain peaks, floating on the surface of the sea, or sitting on volcanoes, did not have real faces. They were slightly blurry and deformed, as if the painter had purposely arranged them this way. He took a look and found that these murals only talked about ancient myths that had been mentioned in the scriptures. Among them, there was content about Yu the Great controlling the flood. There are also some other things. However, no matter how Fan Xian looked at them, they did not match up with the scriptures. He shook his head and gave up on the idea of finding some answers from the incense burner. He found a prayer mat at the side of the hall and threw it in front of the incense burner. He ran down, put his palms together, closed his eyes, and faced the green smoke curling up from the incense burner. His lips moved slightly as he prayed incessantly. In his previous life, Fan Xian was naturally an atheist. In this life, Fan Xian was a firm believer in theism. This change happened very naturally. Anyone who encountered such a strange experience would probably have the same psychological change as him. That was why he knelt and prayed piously, hoping that the ethereal heavens and the traceless temple would be able to explain why he had come to this world. At the same time, he prayed even more piously for the heavens to give him a lot of silver and a very peaceful life. The seemingly tangible green smoke suddenly dissipated. The tip of Fan Xian's ears trembled slightly, as if he had heard something. He opened his eyes in disbelief and looked at the small, slightly trembling porcelain burner on the incense burner. He was incomparably shocked. Could it be that his seemingly pious, but actually absent-minded prayer had actually been detected by the heavens? His gaze rested on the wide incense burner, and Fan Xian finally discovered the root of the problem. A bright light flashed through his eyes. His left hand pressed against the boot that concealed the dagger. Slowly but firmly, he extended his right hand and pulled back the cloth that hung below the incense burner. After the cloth was pulled back, what fell into Fan Xian's eyes was a scene that made him very surprised. A girl wearing a white dress with the right hem was squatting in a corner of the incense burner, looking at Fan Xian in surprise. The girl's eyes were very large and soft, like the surface of a quiet lake that would make one fall into a deep sleep forever. Her facial features were exquisite and beautiful, with light pink skin and long eyelashes. She looked like someone walking out of a painting. Fan Xian was startled, and his gaze rested on her face. Gradually, he realized that the girl's forehead was a little big, her nose was a little sharp, and her skin was a little too white. Her lips seemed to be a little thicker than the average beauty's, and there were still many imperfections. But when put together, coupled with a slightly timid expression and a natural shyness, Fan Xian's heart still moved. He was moved. The girl looked curiously at this young man who was piously praying to the heavens. She realized that his face was unexpectedly beautiful, elegant, and otherworldly. Even his eyelashes were so long. She couldn't help but stare at him a few more times. After looking, the girl felt that something was wrong. A faint red smear quickly spread across both sides of her cheeks, and then quickly spread. Unexpectedly, even the roots of her ears had turned red. But she still couldn't bear to look away. She was curious in her heart. Whose family was this young man outside, to be so handsome? It was quiet in the corner of the Qing temple. Fan Xian's hand continued to hold that piece of muslin. His gaze continued to linger on the girl's face, and the girl gathered her courage to look at him. They looked at each other like this. After an indeterminable amount of time, it was still silent. Fan Xian's gaze gently brushed over the girl's face. Finally, the girl couldn't help but slowly lower her head. Fan Xian's gaze finally fell on the girl's lips. Only then did he realize that her lips were abnormally shiny. He looked at her again curiously and found a reason. It was the reason that he remembered for a long time after the incident. The girl was holding an oily chicken drumstick in her hand, and the oil on her lips was obviously from eating the drumstick. Such a beautiful and otherworldly woman in white was hiding under the incense table of the Temple of Qing, secretly eating a chicken leg. This strong contrast made Fan Xian's mouth drop open, and he couldn't speak for a long time. After a long time, there was finally a sound in the quiet and awkward silence of the incense table. Who are you?" The beautiful man and woman spoke at the same time. Even their slightly trembling voices were very similar. It was the first time Fan Xian had heard the girl's voice. He felt that it was soft and powerless. It was a very comfortable feeling, but also very confusing. His chest tightened, and he actually spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing him spit out blood, the girl was startled, but not because she was afraid. Her eyes naturally showed a strong sense of pity, as if all the pain Fan Xian had suffered was pain in her heart. Seeing her worry for him, Fan Xian's heart warmed. He smiled and comforted her. "It's nothing. Vomiting and vomiting will become a habit." Chapter 58. The wind comes from the south and flies into my bosom. The flower bud in my bosom blooms for a gentleman. The zither and the zither are hard to keep company, and the years press on. Those who give me the papaya will be rewarded with the jasper. Hearing this new witticism, the girl's worried eyes flashed with a hint of a smile. Fan Xian smiled at her and said softly, "Do you still want to hide inside?" The girl shyly shook her head. At that moment, a voice came from outside. "Miss, where did you run off to?" The girl's face darkened. She knew she had to leave. Fan Xian also knew that they must be looking for her. Looking at her expression, he felt a sense of loss, as if afraid that after today's separation, he would never be able to find the girl again. He hurriedly asked, "Will you come back tomorrow?" She shook her head, her expression a little gloomy. "Are you a family member of the nobleman in the main hall?" Fan Xian probed. The girl thought for a moment and smiled. She didn't answer him. Instead, she crawled out of the incense table and ran out like a gust of wind. Before she left the temple, she looked back at Fan Xian and the chicken leg in her hand. She cutely stuck out her tongue, thinking that if her uncle saw this, he would certainly scold her again. She rolled her eyes and ran back, handing the chicken leg to Fan Xian. She smiled and waved her hand, then ran out of the temple. She never came back. Fan Xian blankly knelt on the prayer mat, confirming that the girl he saw earlier was not a fairy sent by heaven. He looked down at the chicken leg in his hand and laughed foolishly. He decided in his heart that even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground, he would find this girl in the capital. If she wasn't betrothed, no, even if she was betrothed to some bastard from another family, he would still snatch her away. When he walked out of the temple with the greasy chicken leg in his hand, he saw a group of carriages heading east. He knew that the girl in white must be in that group. The setting sun shone on the green trees on both sides of the road, making the leaves look like they were on fire. Fan Xian unconsciously raised the chicken leg and took a bite. He suddenly remembered that the chicken leg had also passed by the girl's fragrant lips, and his heart also burned. Chicken drumstick, oh chicken drumstick. You're the luckiest drumstick in the world to be able to let that lady have a bite of it. He was all smiles as he walked toward the center of the capital. He could not find a way back to Fan Manor, but he was in no hurry. In his heart, he was very grateful to the child who had eaten the candied hawthorn. Not far behind him, there was a blind man who he should be thanking. He was holding a bamboo stick as he disappeared into the twilight. Gong Dian's mood was not as good as Fan Xian's. Today, he had accompanied his master out to relax, but he had not expected so many things to happen on the way. First, that unknown youth had managed to sneak past his subordinates and guards and run into the Temple of Qing. Then, that little girl had slipped into the side hall under the watchful eyes of everyone. He really did not know what those old nannies were doing, but he had no place to vent his anger because the master's face was gloomy, as if he was very angry. It seemed that the encrypted letter had something written that made him very unhappy. Gong Dian, the nobleman in the carriage, called coldly. He had never liked to ride in a sedan chair. This was a habit he had developed 20 years ago. If Chen Pingping still does not want to come back, send a team to capture him. Yes, Gong Dian accepted the order, but in his heart, he was secretly complaining. Who could do this job well? Seeing that the carriage had quieted down, Gong Dian let out a secret sigh of relief and relaxed a little. He turned around and saw the dejected guards behind him, which made him furious. Earlier, these guards had been hiding outside the Temple of Qing, who knew that they would all be knocked out, and they could not even see who had done it. And because of this, that youth had been able to so easily enter the heavily guarded Temple of Qing. Gong Dian's brows furrowed as he wondered who had the ability to knock out 8 fifth-rank guards at the same time without making a sound. This was practically the level of the 4 great grandmasters. What if this person was an assassin? His heart was filled with fear, and he did not dare to continue thinking about it. He knew that when he returned, a secret investigation would begin. The last carriage in a line was different from the others. The windows were decorated with elegant flowers. The girl in white, who had awkwardly looked at Fan Xian in the Temple of Qing, was now leaning back in her seat. She had a faint smile on her lips, as if she was still thinking about something. The serving girl saw that the young lady was rarely so happy, and her mood lightened. She asked, "Miss, did something good happen today?" The young lady smiled. "Every time I come out with my uncle, I'm always happy. At least it's much better than staying in that gloomy room." The serving girl pouted, but the imperial doctor said that the young lady's illness cannot be exposed to the wind. As soon as she heard the word illness, the young lady's expression darkened. She thought of the handsome young man she had met earlier, and her mood improved a little. She thought to herself that she had been born with a bad life, and that she did not have many days left. Should she be happy or sad to meet that person? She then thought of the rumor that involved her and of that son of Fan Manor. Although her mother was against it, and that strange father seemed to be against it, but who could win against her uncle? Thinking of this, her heart was filled with worry. She felt a sweetness in her chest and quickly pulled a white handkerchief to her lips. After a few coughs, the handkerchief was stained with blood. Seeing this, the serving girl panicked and said in a sobbing voice, vomiting again, "What should I do?" The young lady smiled faintly. Thinking of what the young man had said, she laughed lightly. "What's wrong with that? You'll get used to it if you keep vomiting." The serving girl made a sound of surprise. She didn't understand what she meant and thought that the young lady's illness had made her confused. It was late at night when Fan Xian returned to Fan Manor, battered and exhausted. He made up his mind to tie Tang Zijing to his waist whenever he went out. Dinner had already begun in Fan Manor, and 4 people were waiting for him at the table. He was a little embarrassed, but Count Sinan's face was expressionless. Lady Lu was also smiling warmly, without a trace of bitterness. After Fan Xian explained in a low voice, Fan Ruo laughed. Her brother was too muddle-headed. Even if he couldn't find his own carriage, he could just hire one from a carriage company. Fan Xian didn't even think about the carriage company, so he could only force a smile and endure Fan Xi's mockery. After dinner, the family of 4 began to play mahjong. Fantasia was like an accountant, watching from the side with an abacus, helping everyone calculate. A trace of sadness flashed in Lady Lu's eyes, but she suppressed her resentment for her son's failure to live up to her expectations. She smiled and chatted with Fantasia. Chapter 59. After playing a few rounds, Fantasy's luck was not good, and he was impatient with Lady Lu being so affectionate. So he gave up his seat and patted Fantasia. Fantasia timidly glanced at his father, and Count Sinan nodded slightly. Overjoyed, Fantasia let out a soft cry and jumped onto the stool. This child was usually timid in front of his father. After eating, he would be forced to study, and he would never be allowed to gamble or play cards. He knew that he was allowed to sit at the table today because his father was in a good mood and wanted to give Fantasia some face. So Fantasia had a much better impression of his older brother from Danzhou. Fantasia wandered around the courtyard, and when he returned to the reception hall, he stared dumbfounded at the table. In front of Fantasia was a pile of copper coins, while the other three families had lost almost all of their money. Thinking back to the day in the carriage, this seemingly naughty little brother of his had displayed an unparalleled passion for wealth. Fantasia finally realized that his little brother was not completely useless. At least when it came to making money, he seemed to have some talent. He stood curiously behind Fantasia, carefully observing how this 12-year-old boy operated. After watching for a while, he couldn't help but be in awe. He saw that this kid's hands were extremely nimble. He could actually count the tiles with one hand, grab them, draw them, play them, knock them, eat them, win them. His other hand was on the abacus, and his 5 fat fingers plucked at the beads on the abacus, making a popping sound. Fantasia won all the bets, and the method of calculating the pawns was very complicated, so Fantasia was the one doing the counting. Fantasia watched from the side. He always felt that this kid could calculate a lot of money. No wonder there were so many copper coins in front of him. Seeing that Fantasia was staring at Fantasia, Lady Lu's expression did not change. She sighed inwardly, thinking that her son's ugly greed for money had been seen by Fantasia. She was afraid that he would become even more confident. She had no idea how shocked Fantasia was, because Fantasia could not see a trace of arrogance or mischief on Fantasia's face. Instead, there was the kind of resolute and serious light that only an idealist could possess. Fantasia concluded that the youth in front of him, as long as he was given a chance to display his abilities, would become a very powerful person in the future. But he also knew that in the kingdom of Qing, if he wanted to make a name for himself, the only way was through the imperial examinations. Even if Fantasia were to inherit the title of nobility due to his family connections, it would be impossible for him to be given an actual position. No wonder Teng Zijing said that Lady Lu hated her son. In this era, merchants were still not valued. The Ministry of Revenue was one thing, the imperial merchant was another, but the merchants of the common people were another. The game ended quickly, and Count Sinan left his seat expressionlessly. This kind of joyous family gathering was not in his nature, but for some reason, today was different from usual. However, as he left, he glanced at Fantasia. Fantasia understood something from a look in his father's eyes. It seemed that he was not happy that he had thrown off the guards his father had sent to protect him during the day. Fantasia smiled and did not respond. After all, he did not like to be followed. Since that was the case, he might as well take action to clarify this point. Lady Lu looked at her son, and her eyes revealed a trace of affection and helplessness. But this emotion was fleeting. She got up and politely bade farewell to Fantasia and Fan Ruo, then left with her husband. All the servants in Count Sinan's manor knew that the master liked to drink a cup of fruit juice every night before going to bed. This was made by Lady Lu herself to help him sleep as he toiled away at the Ministry of Revenue. Fantasia frowned. He had wanted to talk to his father about something, but it seemed that he would have to postpone it. He turned his head and saw Fantasia still bent over the table, recording the numbers. He asked curiously, "Aren't you going to collect the money? Were you recording?" Ruoro had been playing mahjong for a while, and was tired. She gently stretched her wrists and smiled. He gets guests during the new year. That's when Father allows him to play for a while. But every time he wins, he doesn't allow him to keep the copper he wins. He says that a man should not be greedy for such petty gains. Sija doesn't dare go against his father's wishes, but he always records how much he wins. He says that he'll slowly settle accounts with us in the future. Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. The word settle accounts had a different meaning. He steadied his mind and smiled. Sija, I see that you're good at calculating. What are you going to do when you grow up? Fan Sija was young, but when it came to keeping accounts, he was very focused. He didn't answer Fan Xian's question. Ruoro thought that her brother didn't know her brother's temper and was afraid that he would be unhappy. She prepared to help explain, but then she saw Fan Xian's face full of smiles. He was looking at the young man, keeping accounts with some appreciation. After the accounts were finished, Fan Xija seemed to remember the question Fan Xian had just asked. He scratched his head and frowned. Of course I'm going to study, become an official, and bring glory to the family. Fan Xian looked at him, amused. Is that true? Fan Xija's anger dissipated. He lay on the table and said weakly, If I don't say it like that, Mother will hear me and give me a good beating. There are only the three of us here. Why don't you just say the truth? Fan Xian teased. These words fell into Fan Xija's ears, and they gave him a different feeling. He had grown up in the eyes of servants. Most children of officials had strict fathers and kind mothers, but Fan Xija had strict parents. Later, his father asked his sister to discipline him, but she was even stricter. So he was no stranger to the feeling of respect for his younger brother, but he had never experienced it as an older brother. Hearing the words "the truth," Fan Xija was a little dazed. It seemed that this brother in front of him, who was 4 years older than him, wasn't all that scary. He wasn't like his mother had described him to be. On the contrary, he felt a sense of closeness. I like to make money. What's so good about merchants chasing profit? Ruoruo frowned. Fan Xian looked at his sister with disapproval. He was a little disappointed. We've exchanged letters for so many years. How could she still have such strange ideas? Ruoruo's heart tightened when he glared at her. She knew she had said something wrong, and she quickly shut her mouth. Fan Xian smiled and looked at Fan Xija. Whatever it is, just do it well. Making money is the same. I support you. What's the use of your support? Fan Xija sighed. You have to get Father to say this. Do it secretly. Fan Xian was like a devil trying to tempt him. Fan Xija's spirits rose, and then he thought of something. He said passionately, Brother, give me the manuscript for that book. I have a way to sell it for a high price. He didn't seem forced to call him brother. Fan Xian was surprised. Isn't it a bit slow to make money? Are you worried about money? Fan Xija looked at him with disdain. I'm just trying. Realizing that the kid dared to look down on him, Fan Xian became angry. If you want to get the goods, you'll have to show me the proposal first. Chapter 60. What's a proposal? Fan Xija looked at his sister for help. Fan Ruruo blinked and explained, It's what you're going to do. It's very simple. Fan Xija nodded. Ever since he was a child, he had set a grand goal in his heart. That was why he was able to work hard on these things. Fan Xija's dream was to become the second richest family in the world, the Yi family. But at the time, he didn't know that his brother, who encouraged him, had anything to do with the Yi family. A nanny took Fan Xija to wash up. Only the brother and sister were left in the reception hall. Fan Xian walked out in silence, and Ruoro followed quietly. The brother and sister tacitly walked along the winding corridor. Just as they were about to reach Ruo's boudoir, they stopped at the edge of the shallow pool. Ruo was the first to speak. I know there shouldn't be a hierarchy, but I feel that if she really wants to walk that path, it will be very difficult. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. A society with people has its own hierarchy. I've told you this before. There's no need to change anything. But the problem is, we can admit that this kind of thing exists, but there's no need to change our own hearts because of its existence. Fan Ro opened her eyes wide and looked at her brother curiously. What's your heart? It's not the Tao that those swindlers talk about. Fan Xian patted his chest. It's just a simple literal meaning. Your heart is what you want. He continued. Everyone only has one life. How should we spend this one life? When we look back on the past, we won't regret the wasted years, and we won't be ashamed of our mediocrity. Before I die, I can proudly say, I've done everything I wanted to do. Even if I didn't succeed, I've tried. Fan Ruo stared at Fan Xian's face with a look of admiration. I didn't say that, Fan Xian explained awkwardly. Someone called Ostrovsky said it. That's a strange name. It's like someone from the other side of the sea. Not bad, but I changed the last part. After all, I'm not a noble person. My vision is only focused on the 3 years ahead and the 3 miles ahead. So, if Shiro likes it, then let him work hard. That way, he won't regret it in the future. That's how he acts according to his heart, Fan Ruo said thoughtfully. Fan Xian continued his words and said, people have to survive. If they can find a way to support themselves, and this method is where their interests lie, this is a relatively ideal state of survival. Understood. Fan Ruo smiled like a blooming flower. Fan Xian smiled. Perhaps you haven't noticed the look on Sija's face when he's calculating. That look reminds me of saying, serious people are the most beautiful. Fan Ruo giggled, thinking that her brother's appearance could be called beautiful. Fan Xian sternly lectured, don't laugh. In this aspect, you really can't compare to him. At least he clearly knows what he wants in this life. But what about you? Even though the people of the capital call you a talented girl, what do you really want to do? The path of poetry is not a small path. If you really want to put your heart into it, you need to be serious and diligent. Don't just treat it as a pastime. Fan Revo lowered her head and accepted the lecture. She felt warmth in the depths of her heart. She thought that in the past, these questions and answers between teacher and student had finally become a reality. How happy was that? Moonlight shone down from above, and when it passed through the shallow pond, it shone on the corners of the corridor. Fan Xian's face happened to be shrouded in the light, and his already beautiful face became even more delicate. Brother is the most beautiful. Fan Ruo looked at him and said in a low voice. Fan Xian didn't hear what she said. Thinking about the scene in the flower hall, he was a little lost in thought. He said to himself, I hope this house can be quieter. I hope Lady Lu is smart enough not to disappoint me. Just as the two of them were about to part, Fan Xian suddenly thought of the white-clothed girl he had met in the temple of Qing at dusk. Full of anticipation, he described her appearance, thinking that the girl was obviously the daughter of a very wealthy family in the capital. His sister often visited the back gardens of the manors of the nobility in the capital, so he should know something about her. But after hearing her brother's description, Fan Ruo had no clue. She giggled and asked, Where did you meet the fairy? Even your soul was taken away. In her mind, her brother had always been a teacher who was far more mature than his age. This was the first time she had seen him with a disappointed expression on his face, and she couldn't help but be curious about the white-clothed girl. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. If even you don't know her, then it looks like I really won't be able to find her. Although he said this, his heart was firm. He knew that one day he would meet that girl again, eating a chicken drumstick. He suddenly thought of something, and his heart trembled. A stick of candied hawthorn had led him to the temple of Qing, where he had always wanted to go, and then he had seen that girl. These coincidences made him believe in the word fate. His heart was filled with great anticipation, and he said excitedly, Do you think it's possible that she is the young lady of the Lin family? Fan Ruoruo frowned. I've never seen the young lady of the Lin family. After all, her identity is a bit. She looked at her brother and said carefully, a bit inconvenient, so very few people know what she looks like. But occasionally, some news comes from the young lady of the Yi family. It's said that the two of them are bosom buddies and very close. The young lady of the Yi family? Hearing the word Yi now, Fan Xian instinctively felt nervous. The daughter of Yi Zhong, the commander of the capital's garrison, Yi Ling-er. Fan Ruo asked curiously. What's wrong? Fan Xian smiled, thinking of the first day he had entered the capital, when he had seen the girl on the horse. If he could find her, he wasn't afraid of losing any clues. But Fan Ro thought for a moment, then said, "But I'm guessing that the girl you met today is definitely not the young lady of the Lin family. So even if I ask you, Linger, it won't be of any use." "Why are you so sure?" Fan Xian had always hoped that the plot of a romance novel would come true for him. Hearing this now, he couldn't help but be surprised. Chapter 61. Moonlight shone on the porch. Fan Ro said with pity, "My future sister-in-law is said to be suffering from tuberculosis. She often coughs up blood, so she has been forbidden to eat meat. The girl you speak of is eating chicken legs." She thought about the scene her brother had described earlier and couldn't help but laugh. Of course it can't be Miss Lin. Furthermore, it said that Miss Lin's appearance is only delicate and pretty. She's definitely not as beautiful as you described. Fan Xian thought about it and sighed. He put the matter aside, but he wouldn't give up on the idea of finding the girl. Another image appeared in his mind, and he couldn't help but frown. Tuberculosis. He knew that in this world, tuberculosis was equivalent to an incurable disease. Although he had studied with Fei Jie for a year and had never stopped cultivating in all aspects, since the other party was the daughter of the eldest princess, there would definitely be an imperial physician to treat it. If even the imperial physicians could not cure it, what could he do? Fei Jie's absence was a big problem. The next day, when Fan Xian woke up, he found that his father, sister, and Lady Lu were not there. He ate some porridge and side dishes, then prepared to leave. He planned to go to the Temple of Qing to try his luck and see if he could meet the girl again. Just as he was about to leave, Fan Xizha ran over and pulled on his sleeve. He pulled him into the study and very seriously handed him a few pieces of paper. Fan Xian looked at him curiously and saw that his brother's eyes were bloodshot. It seemed that he had stayed up all night. "You didn't sleep?" he asked. "If Second Aunt saw you, wouldn't she scold you again?" Fan Xizha laughed. "I learned from you. I kept it a secret." Fan Xian smiled and rubbed the pieces of paper with his fingers. He rested his chin on his hand and looked at them. Written on them were the plans that Fan Xizha had made the night before. Although Fan Xian had not been a successful businessman in his previous life, he had seen pigs run. The business atmosphere of his previous life and the kingdom of Qing today could not be mentioned in the same breath. Add to that the special profession he had once held, and he was confident in this. His brows gradually furrowed. "That's a good idea, but I'm not familiar with the capital, so the location of the bookstore is up to you. But there's a problem. Although we're the only one who has the manuscript, how can you guarantee that other booksellers won't steal it after you printed it?" Fan Xizha said with a face full of fanaticism, "The family is very idle now, and those servants have nothing to do. We can let them wander the streets, and if they see a pirated shop, they can smash it." Fan Xian was dumbfounded. "Do you only know how to smash and rob?" It did not meet his expectations at all. He shook his head with a bitter smile. Don't think that the booksellers are inconspicuous. In fact, the profits they make are not small. Who knows what kind of background they have? What are you afraid of? This manuscript originally belonged to our family. How can he be justified in stealing it? Fan Xizha shouted. Fan Xian reminded him. There are no provisions in the Qing Kingdom's laws that protect manuscript for being printed. Besides, this book didn't pass the 8th Bureau's inspection. If you go to court, I'm afraid you'll have to pay for it first. Fan Xizha chuckled and said, I'm not afraid of that. If we really want to open a bookstore, we can just have our father write a letter. The 8th Bureau won't refuse. Fan Xian thought about it and agreed. His seemingly ordinary father had a much deeper relationship with the Overwatch Council than most people knew. He changed his mind and said, but even if you get rid of your identity as a banned book, you can't just rely on smashing and robbing to destroy your competitors. As the saying goes, you can't hit someone in the face. You chased away middle-aged women on the streets and alleys of the capital and closed down other people's shops. That's a way of shedding all pretense of cordiality. For the sake of money, it's not worth it for both sides to fight each other. What are you afraid of? Fantasia rolled his eyes. It seemed that his older brother was a bit too soft-hearted. If you don't think it's worth it, you can think of a way to make a rule. In the future, we'll follow the rule. If other booksellers dare to steal it again, we'll just have the authorities deal with it. Fan Xian laughed heartily. Rules? Do you think the laws of the court will be so trifling? Just because the Fan family wants to publish a book, they'll change the law? Fantasia shook his head. How can we change the law? Of course, we have to take the lower path. Changing the rules of the Jingdo garrison is very simple. That fierce woman in Yizhong's family has a good relationship with Princess Rojia. We just have to ask my sister to let Prince Jing's manor and the Yi manor know. Fan Xian's interest was piqued. The capital's garrison regulations can regulate the sale of books? Fantasia was surprised. After thinking for a moment, he said, there seems to be a clause in there that governs refugees and traveling merchants. It'll be a good time to make use of it. Fan Xian was full of admiration. He thought that this young man in front of him had the potential to become an unscrupulous businessman. He could even think of such a ruthless move as collusion between the government and merchants and the city guards. But he knew that there was always a gap between ideals and reality. He asked, have you calculated the profits? 10 chapters per volume, 8 tales of silver per volume. There are 68 chapters in total. There are 640,000 people in the capital. 1 volume per 1,000 people means that we can sell more than 600 copies. If we calculate it carefully, we can sell them for 35,840 tales of silver. Fantasia explained with great interest. He had already calculated all of these costs. The rent on Luodong Road is more expensive. Plus the editing costs, we can leave the printing to the Hall of Scrolls. That way, we won't have to worry about it. The Hall of 10,000 Scrolls. Fan Xian asked curiously. The most famous private printing workshop in the capital. Fantasia laughed sinisterly. They have a big business, but they don't have any reliable people behind them. If they dare to steal our manuscripts, we could just copy them and turn them upside down. I'm afraid they'll make even more money. Fan Xian was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. If we calculate it carefully, we can make at least a few thousand tales of silver in a year. If we can really make other booksellers stop, the number will increase. Fan Xian sighed. You're too optimistic. If you want to be a successful businessman, you must first prepare for a rainy day. Let's talk about the number you estimated. Although the people of the capital are wealthy, each set costs more than 50 tales of silver. How many people can afford it? Fantasia was shocked. He looked at Fan Xian as if he were looking at a monster. Don't you know the market price of your book? Fan Xian's eyes widened. In his previous life, Dream of the Red Chamber had become popular during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor. He had heard rumors that it was sold for hundreds of tales of silver. But that was only a handwritten copy, and not many copies have been circulated. If you were going to publish it in a big way, could it be sold for so much? Fantasia sighed. A few days ago, I heard that the daughter of the capital's magistrate read your book. She couldn't eat or drink and was in a daze. The magistrate's wife burned the manuscript. She cried out in pain. Why did you burn my precious treasure? She fell ill for a long time. Brother, the capital is not like other places. There are as many officials as there are carps swimming around. How many young ladies are there who have nothing to do? Selling hundreds or thousands of copies is not a problem. Fan Xian was dumbfounded. He wondered if he should bring some snacks to the poor magistrate's daughter. Chapter 62. Then he heard Fantasia say proudly, this is just a small amount of money. After I've earned this much, I'll write another 70 or 80 chapters. I can't sell them all. I'll have to edit them carefully and make a rare edition. Then I'll auction them all off in private. Whoever wants to see the end first, whoever wants to see whether or not Miss Duo is married to Second Master Bao, will have to pay up first. Fan Xian twisted his ear and scolded him. What does Miss Duo have to do with Second Master Bao? You've never even read a book, and you want to sell it. Fantasia felt wronged. The one you bought on the street yesterday, I asked my sister to read it when I got home, but after reading a few dozen words, I felt it was boring, so I fell asleep. This young master of Fan Manor, who only cared about money, really didn't understand why the women in the capital were crazy about this tasteless book. Fine, I won't argue with you about this, Fan Xian said helplessly. But these things are complicated, and you're just a little kid who has to go to school. You don't have time for these things. Let's wait a few years. A few years? The safflower would be cold by then, Fan Xija shrieked. What else can we do? You're a son of Fan Manor, after all. If you really go into business, how can you hide it from Lady Lu and father? Be careful, or they'll tear your skin off. Fan Xija said painfully, Yes, so I've decided to borrow a shopkeeper from Qingyu Hall, and I'll have to hide behind scenes. Fan Xian was very surprised. Aside from being rude and unreasonable, this young man in front of him was also very talented in business. He had actually thought of becoming a professional manager. In his excitement, Fan Xian had inadvertently left out the words Qingyu Hall. Seeing that the boy had made up his mind, he sighed and took out the banknotes he had accumulated over the years, plus the money his sister had given him, and handed them over. He told him to take it slow and to first discuss things with the servants in the manor. It wasn't a good idea to feed those people without using them. Fan Xija beamed and counted the money. He found that this brother of his had a lot of money, and with the money he had saved up, he should have enough for his first startup capital. Fan Xian didn't say anything else. He only carefully reminded him, if you want to use the connections of the upper class to suppress the good people of the lower class, other than relying on your father's name, you also have to promise other people some benefits. What are you talking about, big brother? Fan Xija said fiercely. Of course we have to bribe them. If you become a high-ranking official in the future, there will be a day when they will spit it back out. Fan Xian almost fainted. He quickly pushed the door open and left. In the past, he had always felt that banknotes had a peculiar fragrance. Today, he realized that the stench of money really was overwhelming. It was noon, and the sun was blazing fiercely. The trees on both sides of the road drooped lifelessly, unable to provide any comfort or shelter to the pitiful pedestrians. Fan Xian picked up a bowl of sour plum soup by the side of the road and took small sips. He knew that drinking too quickly wouldn't quench his thirst, and his stomach wouldn't be able to take it. He listened to the sounds of cicadas in the trees next to him, and was very puzzled. What month was it? Spring hadn't even passed yet, so why was summer already here? In the distance, the Temple of Qing looked particularly solemn under the sun. It had dried up some of its original elegance, and its black, round eaves reflected the sunlight. The scene was very sacred. Today, the Temple of Qing was more lively than yesterday. From time to time, people would go in to pray. Fan Xian was a little curious. Why had it been so quiet when he had gone yesterday? Of course, he didn't know that when the nobleman had stolen half a day's rest, both sides of the road had already been guarded. The reason he had been able to walk to the door and exchange blows with the master was all because of someone's secret indulgence. Wu Zhu had indeed indulged him, indulging him in drinking and fooling around. Even when he wanted to go to the temple, Wu Zhu would knock out so many guards for such a small matter. Fan Xian didn't know how much trouble he had gotten himself into yesterday. He was still sitting on the bench, drinking sour plum soup, and waiting for the girl with his legs crossed. In a room very close to the Temple of Qing, the sunlight couldn't penetrate the room, so it was a little dark and cool. Gong Jian sat coldly on a chair, adjusting his internal energy so that he could enter into peak condition. Last night, he had been on duty, but this morning he hadn't returned home. Instead, he had come to the Temple of Qing, because no matter how he thought about it, he felt that there was something strange about the appearance of that young man yesterday. All of his subordinates had been knocked out by a grandmaster at the same time. What was the connection between that and that young man entering the Temple of Qing? For some reason, Gong Jian felt that the young man would definitely come here again today. Perhaps that mysterious master would also come here. This was the intuition of a master. Although it wasn't necessarily accurate, it was worth a gamble. But that damned eunuch Hong didn't believe his judgment at all. He just kept investigating among the guards, so Fan Xian had to come alone. Gong Jian sat quietly in the room. His gaze passed through the narrow crack in the window, coldly looking at the entrance of the Temple of Qing. Outside, Fan finally couldn't stand the scorching sun anymore. He drank the soup in one gulp, undid the 2 buttons on his shirt, and walked toward the Temple of Qing with his tongue out. Fan footsteps drew closer and closer to the Temple of Qing. Gong Yin seemed to hear something and frowned slightly. Under the sky, full of sunlight, Fan feet felt hot when they landed on the stone floor. He seemed to hate this feeling and pulled his feet back. Then, he fastened the buttons on his chest and turned around with a smile. He returned to the stall selling sour plum soup and asked for another bowl. He slowly drank it, then walked away from the Temple of Qing with leisurely steps. It wasn't until he got into the waiting carriage at the end of the street that he exhaled and shouted, "Return to the manor quickly." Tung Zijing looked at him curiously and found that the young master's face was expressionless. Sitting in the carriage, Fan turned his head and lifted the rear curtain to look in the direction of the Temple of Qing. He frowned, not knowing why Wu Zhu had told him to leave, and even less knowing who was waiting for him there. Gong Dian's face was cold as he looked in front of him. When he heard the footsteps heading back, his eyes lit up and he prepared to stand up. Unexpectedly, he felt a gust of cold wind blowing from behind him and his neck felt cold. It was late spring and the weather was hot, but Gong Dian broke out in a cold sweat. His hands rested steadily on his knees. His fingernails were well manicured, and the simple but incomparably sharp knife rested 3 inches in front of his hands. But he didn't dare to draw it. He could feel that the person behind him was stronger and faster than him. Chapter 63. Gong Dian was recognized as one of the strongest fighters in the capital. He had experienced countless life and death situations in his life, but he had never imagined that he would meet such a powerful figure in the heavily guarded capital, next to the Temple of Qing. The aura of the person behind him was not very strong, but the feeling of being one with the environment was something that Gong Dian had only seen from his uncle. He and the commander of the capital's garrison were brothers, and his uncle was Yi Luyan, one of the 4 grandmasters in the world. From what he knew, he could not imagine that a grandmaster would disregard his identity and appear behind him like an assassin. The room was silent for a long time. The little finger on Gong Dian's left hand trembled slightly. He knew that he could no longer maintain this passive balance, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Without any warning, the real qi in his body rushed out, and his whole body turned into a gray dragon. His left foot kicked backwards, and his right hand hooked. Clang! A clear sound rang out, and the blade cut through the air. It turned into a fearless slash and chopped behind him. With a muffled grunt, the slash hit nothing but air. The mysterious grandmaster from before had long disappeared. Gong Dian's inner strength was vigorous, and after his slash missed, he was unable to restrain his spirit. His chest felt as if it had been struck by lightning, and a hot current rushed up his body. 2 streaks of blood seeped out of his nostrils. Looking at the empty ground, there was no fear in Gong Dian's eyes, only a trace of confusion. The opponent clearly had the ability to easily assassinate him. So why did he leave in the end? In an instant, he thought of the youth from the day before, which was very similar to his own. He guessed that the grandmaster who had just appeared and disappeared might have some connection to his own school, and that was why he had been merciful. After resting for a while, he walked out of the small room with a somewhat dispirited expression, ready to return to the manor. Why did Wu Zhu not kill him? It was obvious that it was not because of Yi Liuyun's incense. After all, Wu Zhu was a monster who even dared to kill Yi Luyan. The reason was actually very simple. Yesterday, Gong Jian had made Fan vomit blood, so today, Wu Zhu wanted to make Gong Jian vomit blood. It was that simple. It was still early when Fan returned to Fan Manor. Fan was still in his study, working on his money-making project. Roro had been sent off to someone. In the entire garden, there were only a few servants and maids. Although some of the maids were very pretty, Fan was not in a good mood, and the environment was not right, so he had no interest in teasing them. He drank a cup of tea and frowned. Who was it that was in the Temple of Qing today? Why was the other party guarding him there? Could it be that it was a family member left behind by the lady in white, waiting for him? Thinking of this possibility, Fan Xian's heart warmed. But thinking of Wu Zhu's message, his heart immediately cooled. If it was as he guessed, Uncle Wu Zhu would certainly not care. He was a wooden person and was not very interested in the matters of love. Fan Xian changed into a lighter set of clothes, loosened his belt, and entered his father's study. To his surprise, he found Count Sinan there. There's not much to do in the ministry today. Fan Jing had his son sit down. You've been in the capital for a few days now. Don't be fooling around outside all day. I already know about what happened in the restaurant yesterday. In the future, you should avoid these kinds of conflicts as much as possible. Don't be like that good-for-nothing brother of yours. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. He didn't want to explain any further. Suddenly, he thought of something and asked, Father, when can I go see Miss Lin? Fan Jing seemed surprised that the young man would make such a suggestion. When you're married, he said with a smile, you'll see her every day. Are you in a rush? Fan Xian pursed his lips into a smile. After marriage is after marriage. I don't want to go to the bridal chamber without knowing what my wife looks like. He thought for a moment, then smiled. I see my sister, that Yi Linger, and Princess Rojia are often out. Is there anything wrong with keeping a distance between a man and a woman? A young man and a young woman seeing each other isn't too much. Fan Jing smiled. But you must know that Miss Lin's identity is rather special. Although her surname is Lin, she has little to do with the Prime Minister's manor. She grew up in the palace. For the sake of the royal family, and for the sake of the eldest princess, His Majesty took her in as his adopted daughter. She was given the title of princess, but this princess is different from Rojia. Fan Jing's voice was a little suppressed. Although few people know that she is the daughter of the eldest princess and that she is the daughter of Master Lin. No one dares to say it, and no one dares to admit it. She lives in the palace for many years, and very few people see her. It was only at the beginning of the year that she moved out because of that incident and because of her poor health. Fan Xian sighed. I heard that she was in poor health, so I wanted to see her. Perhaps I could be of some help. Fan Jing frowned. You and Fei Jie have only been together for a year and a half. Do you dare to say that you are better than the imperial physicians? Young people should be modest and cautious. Fan Xian agreed, but he still didn't give up. But you have to at least let me know what she looks like, right? You married her not for her, but for what she stands for. Fan Jing looked at him coldly. You must abandon all unrealistic ideas and be as hard as a rock to crush any stale feelings of warmth. Fan Xian furrowed his brows with some disgust and said, I feel that your words are also very corny. Fan Jing was slightly angry. How can you say that? Fan Xian smiled and replied respectfully, I've said it before. I'm not a person who is easy to control. Don't you want to take back everything that belongs to you? Fan Jing seemed to have thought of something and calmed down. Fan Xian was surprised and then very seriously said, Actually, when I was in Danzhou, I learned many things. I believe that I have the ability to achieve things in this world that correspond to my abilities. If I can take back my mother's business, of course I won't object, but this must be based on my own will. If I want, I will do it. If I don't want, I won't. It's that simple. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.